It's always nice to have people in the room who aren't regulars at Audit, so welcome. The meeting will be recorded both by the council. We have members of the press in the room so that everyone's aware. Please let me know if that's an issue. If members aren't able to attend the committee, please can you make sure that you find an alternate. The work of Audit Committee is very important for the governance of the council, particularly at a time when the finances are as difficult as they are for Somerset Council. So it's really important that we've got a full complement of members. This is an apolitical committee. We're here to represent all residents of Somerset. It's important that we've got everyone here to contribute where possible. So thank you. We do have a slight error on page 1 of the agenda, which is that Jenny Whitton is listed as a committee member, but her term of office has now ended. So we'd like to thank Jennifer for her contribution to Audit Committee. I'm delighted to be able to welcome Lindy Van Vuren as our new independent member. We'll introduce Lindy properly in a moment, but welcome, Lindy. Okay, so starting with apologies for absence, I think I've got Councillor Carswell online. Other than that, does anyone want to raise any other apologies? No? Okay. Declarations of interest from any member in the room? No? Perfect. So if I can move you swiftly on to item 3, which are minutes of the meeting on the 28th of September. Does anyone have any matters of accuracy, first of all? Mandy.
Chair, forgive me, it wasn't accuracy, but there were a couple of actions.
We'll come on to that in a moment. So any matters of accuracy? No, so matters arising that aren't covered on today's agenda, Mandy?
Thank you. There were a couple of items, and if I've had something about them, I apologise because it means I've missed them. The first one on page 13, it said the 151 was to confirm what happened to the housing underspends. I think there was going to be a follow-up on that. I haven't seen it, so that was the first. And the second one was on, again, page 13, under item 31, Mr. Johnson, he said he would undertake to find out if what would affect the value of assets. It was a question last time, and again, I don't think I've had anything back on that, so I just didn't want them to not be actioned. Thank you.
So Debbie's been prepared, is that correct? Okay, is that on both items? Okay, will that be reported back next month? Okay, Jason?
If it's helpful, I'll make sure the response comes out to all members of the committee. So I'll send that through as soon as we got it.
Yes, please. Andy?
There's also a point in there about election expenses for one of the councils. They said we'll get a full written response, so that needs to be included as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got 3 items then, election expenses, and the other 2 items that the Mandy's raised. If we can make sure that they are circulated electronically as soon as, really. This is an action from September, so I don't really want this going through till January. So if you can circulate as soon as possible, thank you. Yes, so if everyone's happy, can I have a proposer for the minutes, Andy, and a seconder, Mandy? That's fine. Everyone in favour? Unanimous. Any abstentions? Anyone against? Right, so I'm going to slightly rejig the agenda now. So I'm going to introduce Lindy as our new independent member. Lindy was appointed by full council on the 27th of September. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Lindy. I think Jason's going to do the formal intro.
Yeah, I'm not going to add a lot really. So in terms of appointments, the committee decided to look to appoint 2 independent members. As members will know, we went through a process. We appointed 1, which is Lindy, who's with us today, and I'll hand over to a secretary for her to introduce herself and give us a bit of a flavour of her background. The other post remains vacant at the moment, and the view of the appointments, the chair and vice chair and myself, was we'd look to review that in a few months' time to understand the skills mix and whether we had any gaps and whether we'd look to go back out again. So over to you, Lindy, to introduce yourself and give us a bit of a back.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Chair, through you. My name is Lindy Jansen van Vieren. So my background is I'm a chartered accountant through SAICA, which is a chartered institution in South Africa. And then, so I did my articles at BDO Spencer Stewart, and I went over to the Auditor General, which is like the National Audit Office. You guys know. So in government, I've got all my experience, or most of my experience in government. So I've audited a lot of local municipalities and a couple of metropolitan municipalities, as well as public entities of departments and public entities of national departments. So I've audited Department of Health, the medical depot, the car depot, Department of the Premier, you name it, I've been there. I've seen lots of things in my life. All right, and then I did, because the auditing also includes a part of the IT controls audit, I did a certification through ISACA, which is in America. So that's the CISA qualification, Certified Information Systems Auditor. So I know a little bit about the IT and the auditing of the IT and the COVID controls, etc. And then I moved over to internal audit at one of the metropolitan municipalities with a 17,000 workforce. So it's quite a big one in the East Rand of South Africa. And I was a divisional head for corporate internal audit for 4 years. And after that, I moved over to a public entity as a CFO for 4.5 years. So that was a national, it was you also have a council for built environment. So it was the same type of principle where all the professionals in the built environment reported to us, and we were like an overseeing body for them. And yes, and that's when I was also responsible for risk management. I think I'm going over my 2 minutes. I'm almost done. So I was responsible I was also the CRO. We were not a big entity. And then I did through England, not knowing that I was going to come here, but it was the best institute in the world. And that's why I did it for risk management. So I did my certification in risk management. So I've got a bit of everything experience in that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy, and welcome. I'm sure you're going to be a great asset to the committee. So please don't feel shy today about asking questions. Audit, as you know, is an active process, so it relies on all of us to ask questions and to seek the answers that that the public writ large would ask us to look for. So I'm going to move on to item 4, which is public question time. So I've got 2 members of the public who have registered to speak today. David Orr and Nigel Behan. I understand that Councillor Leishon is going to read the question from David Orr, and that Mr. Behan is in the room. Is that correct, Mr. Behan? Yeah, that's fine. So if we take Mr. Orr's question first, Councillor Leishon.
Thank you very much, Chair. I can see that Mr. Orr is actually online, so I don't know whether he wishes to introduce his own.
Mr. Orr, would you like to ask your own question?
I would, please, Chair. I did ask if it could be.
Could we have the volume up in the room a little, please? Sorry, Mr. Orr, just a moment. Yeah, we're just going to get the volume. Just going to get the volume turned up in the room. Go ahead, Mr. Orr.
Yeah, I do want to read my own statement. I also thought I'd agree with the clerk to the meeting that I could make my statement immediately before item 6 on the agenda.
This is immediately before item 6 on the agenda.
Oh,
we've moved item 4 up, and this will flow straight into item 6.
Okay, so shall I read my statement, Chair?
Yes, please.
This new unitary council is, according to auditors, facing a section 114 notice from next February onwards. This is the private sector equivalent to going bust. The Conservatives predicted savings of £18 million from a new unitary council, yet you are facing an existential crisis within just 5 months of formation. The council inherited from the county council a 23.4 million overspend, while the 4 district councils passed over 4.7 million of underspends together with their reserves. There were always concerns about the county council winning the unitary competition as a continuing authority. Would the new unitary council get a fresh start, or would the existing county council management cultures dominate? Would the ongoing and intractable deficits in social care quickly consume the district council's reserves and underspends? The deteriorating financial position has worsened by a staggering 4.2 million in just 1 month. This does not appear to indicate good financial controls or provide confidence that overspends will be tackled and savings made. The council has reached for expensive consultants to tell well-paid executives how to make savings. Adult social care is spending 7.5 million with Newton Europe to save a claimed 10 million, but those savings will probably arrive after the council may well be bust. In the disastrous Southwest One outsource, which many people remember, not only were 182 million of assured savings promised but never delivered, so they weren't made, but the council was left with 67 million of additional costs, money that could have been spent on social care, roads, and things like that. The Ignite transformation programme in Taunton Deane and South Somerset councils caused service disruption with very high recovery costs. A private company expecting to go bust within a year would show real urgency. Are the unitary savings from combining 5 councils into one being driven forward with urgency? There are big savings in reducing management overheads and rationalising a huge property portfolio when you merge 5 councils into one. What is the position on management overhead cost reductions, and how are we going on rationalising or renting out the overlapping property portfolio from 5 councils, both to raise cash and generate income? There is a great deal of scepticism about the very high levels of working from home in the public sector in general. I believe this makes team working and performance management harder. Should councils like the private sector be moving to hybrid working where some office-based work is required? If the council is going to have mostly home-based working, then how many offices are now redundant and how many are required? A Section 114 notice looking at other councils could result in a 15% council tax rise, huge service cuts to basic and minimum levels, and staff losses with minimal terms and conditions. A Section 114 will result in Whitehall sending in commissioners to do the job that this administration is elected to do and the senior officers are paid to manage. Members, the time for urgent action is now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. So I understand that the response from the council will be given by Councillor Lashon.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Orr, for joining us on Teams today. I want to thank you for your well-informed statement with its incorporated questions. So I'll try to take the questions in the order they were included in your statement. So first of all, the month 5 projected outturn has been revised for executive, and it now shows a reduced projected overspend due to a reduction in financing costs. However, the projected overspend figure is still very high. It follows a year, 22-23, as you've already said, when the budget set by the previous administration was very soon proven to be inadequate to deal with the effects of inflation and increased interest rates, particularly in social care. That overspend has already required the use of 18.7 million of reserves. And as many councils across the country and across the political spectrum are finding, it is simply not possible to plan and survive on use of reserves. Although, strangely, the government would appear to prefer local councils to not hold reserves. I cannot imagine how severe the situation would be if councils didn't have reserves. So apologies for this being quite a long answer, but there were a lot of questions, Mr. Orr, from you. So the costs of adults and children's social care are indeed the major factor. and it's of great concern to this administration that many of the facilities and services for Somerset residents are not statutory and therefore less secure, but are hugely important within the prevention agenda. So we need to ensure that residents can lead healthy, happy and fulfilled lives in their own homes for as long as possible. So the work with Newton Europe that you have referenced is based on a risk-sharing basis, with Newton not finishing in Somerset until they have delivered at least the minimum of £10 million of ongoing savings. Their work is intended to ensure that the number of residents coming into residential care do not increase, and that reablement becomes the default priority for residents of Somerset. I'm sure you'll know that compared with previous experience of working with consultants, that Newton Europe have a good reputation and a good track record of working with other councils across the country. So for children's, the work that has been underway for some time with the Shore Trust is now ensuring that children and young people can return from very expensive, unregulated placements to live in Somerset again. The homes of the Homes and Horizons project are purchased by Somerset Council, and as they have no change of use in terms of planning permission and are improved considerably in their energy ratings, the investments are, one might say, as safe as houses. So your point about a similar situation with a private company creating a greater sense of urgency is well made. However, no sensible company would seek to acquire or merge with 4 other organisations or companies at the same time. Yet that is what we were required to do just 4 years, well actually less than 4 years, after 2 councils have formed 1 council. So for a sanity check on that decision, I would refer you to the current government. Working from home, or rather hybrid working, has its place in our council. We also need to recognise that many of our highly valued staff are needed to work in people's homes, on the streets and in our parks, and so they don't have that choice. For elected members, the ability to attend some meetings and many briefings on Teams or Zoom is a boon to those who rightly wish to reduce their travel or who have other responsibilities. So as we have started to understand the need for office space for all of our staff, we have at the same time been able to commence the rationalisation of council buildings. However, it's important to acknowledge that leases to other organisations, such as the police at Dean House and Brimpton Way, and other partners and voluntary sector organisations at Shepton Mallet and Bridgewater, mean that we are not able to put up the for sale signs until we have a clear plan and are able to work with our partners in the One Public Estate so that we can ensure the best possible results in terms of human resources and also capital receipts. So we are well aware as an administration, still a fairly new administration, but we are aware of the implications of a Section 114 notice. It is our intention to take those difficult decisions and set a direction for the new council with the benefit of our local knowledge and our commitment to Somerset, rather than leave it to government commissioners paid by the people of Somerset to find a financial answer that does not take into account local commitment and indeed corporate memory. So the next executive meetings in November and December will be critical in our absolute necessity to lay out our future plans for Somerset Council, as we recognise fully that the local authority world has changed since the One Somerset business case was written. Thank you very much, Mr. Orr. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leishon. So you've got a full response to your question, Mr. Orr. If you have any supplemental questions, you may put them in writing and I will ensure you get a written response. So I'd like to move on.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Leishon for her answer. It gave me some reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. So I'd like to move on to our second speaker today, which is Mr. Nigel Behan from Unite the Union. Mr. Behan, you've got 3 minutes, but I'll give you some latitude because I know there are a lot of questions in here. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll go through the statement first and then try and summarise the questions rather than read them all out. Unite is concerned that Somerset Council are at risk of issuing a Section 114 notice, which is effectively bankrupt, as many other councils are indicating they may have to do, and not for only shortfalls, increasing pressures, etc., in funding for adults and children's social care. Our members provide vital public services which are important for service users and the functioning of the local economy. United is willing to help avoid Somerset Council having to go down this drastic step. The prospect of a 114 notice will increase anxiety and uncertainties amongst dedicated staff. Issuing a 114 notice has a detrimental impact on democratic accountability, as was indicated earlier, and local service provision, as witnessed in areas where a 114 notice has been issued. And I'll just summarise the questions. Question 1 is about the letter to the Department for Levelling Up, where it mentions about the change in the general reserves and indicates there's a figure of 113.9 million. I mean, that's a question really. Other commitments, I just wondered what those other commitments are. Question 2 is about the financial challenges in social care, and also about the recent statement from last October in the exec paper about competitive market failure in adult social care. It's just worth noting that other councils are considering, I'm not saying they're going to do it, bringing parts of the care residential sector in-house. And question 3 is this as well. Do you anticipate any new or additional funding from central government to address the funding challenges, shortfalls, in particular in children and social care, as that's what 65% plus of council expenditure? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Behan. So I'll pass over to Councillor Leishon again for the council's response.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Behan. Thank you for your personal and professional commitment to all of these committees. I know that I've been seeing you at committees for many years, and I really appreciate your informed questions every time. So if I could take those 3 questions one at a time, please, Chair. So the question on the reserves, so the amalgamated earmarked reserves are currently being reviewed, and a paper will come to executive in early December. The reserves from the 5 predecessor councils include, first of all, the general fund reserves, where we know we already have that amalgamated total of 49.8 million at the top end of the suggested range of general fund reserves. Then earmarked reserves that are in effect ring fence. So those will include specific projects or programmes such as the Town Deal or Section 106 agreements. They are clearly ring fenced. Earmarked reserves that were identified for predecessor council priorities. So some of these may be able to be repurposed, giving the new council a higher level of resilience, but with understanding, of course, that those reserves can only be spent once. And then also reserves that are held on behalf of other organisations such as Somerset Rivers Authority, Local Enterprise Partnership and Maintain Schools. So the figure that you quote is made up from the earmarked reserves that are currently being reviewed, plus reserves that are earmarked, clearly earmarked for Newton Europe's work, and reserves that are clearly earmarked for work on the highway, including, sadly, ash dieback and further highways vegetation. So that's the answer for question 1. These will be sent out and that will have the full breakdown of the reserves for you. The answer to question 2 is that this council, and before it Somerset County Council, has for many years used block and spot placements for adult social care and placements for children and young people who are not able to live at home. For those years, the Somerset market for adults placements was providing extremely good value for the council taxpayer of Somerset. The impacts of interest rates, cost of living, Brexit, COVID jabs, and the commencement of the fair cost of care exercise promised by the government have all been detrimental to the cost of placements, both block and spot placements. Further pressures have been caused by what is known as capital drop, which is a rather unpleasant expression, but it means where a resident's financial contribution to their own care, known as self-funding, ends as their capital is exhausted. And the council then takes on that responsibility to pay the care home. So to replace that market would consider very considerable capital investment in new fit-for-purpose buildings, in recruitment and in management. At this stage in the life of the new Somerset Council, that would, I believe, be far beyond the financial capability and human resources available to this council. And then, Chair, for question 3 on month 5. So as I've already said in response to Mr. Orr, that has been revised for the executive meeting on the 8th of November. It looks a little better on the projected overspend, but nowhere near good enough. It's still very high. So my expectation, and this is as lead member, but without any knowledge of what government may or may not do, I expect that projected overspend for this year to be covered by a combination of in-year savings, with all directorates now understanding the scale and immediacy of the new council's financial challenge, some use of reserves, which we hope to keep to the minimum possible, and a hoped for allocation from government for all upper tier authorities towards the increased demand and cost of children's services and adult social care. That is traditionally published on the Thursday before Christmas, spoiling the holiday season for every 151 officer in the land. It may even be published later this year into the new year. That, of course, would make budget setting even more difficult. I've also read, since writing my answers, I've also read that the district council network, because of the pressures on housing and homelessness, are saying that they need at least 6.5% increase in their budgets to cover for those demands. It is obvious to every colleague in this room that now we are a unitary council. We see the pressures for the upper tier councils in social care. We see the pressures in housing and homelessness, and we see every other pressure that has come together. We also see the strengths in the history, the legacy, and the staffing of all those councils coming together too, as well as, of course, the elected members with their knowledge. So, Chair, I hope those answers are helpful. You may wish to consider whether the questions and the answers would be useful for all members rather than members of this committee. And I thank Mr. Bean and Mr. Orr very much for their time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lechon. So I'd like to echo Councillor Lechon's thanks to Mr. Orr and Mr. Behan for taking the time to come here and speak today. Your contributions have been constructive, and we will make sure that the written responses are circulated to all members, because this is now the #1 priority facing the authority. So the next item is item 6, which is the external audit report on the value for money letter written by our Section 151 officer. So I know this item is going to be of very great import to everyone here and to the residents of Somerset. So I really want to spend some time looking at it. This is, as I've said, the #1 priority facing the council at the moment, and we need to work collectively as an audit committee to try and make sure that the solutions are robust and that the promised savings are delivered, and the learning is taken where they're not delivered. So, Jason, are you introducing this item? Yeah, over to you.
Good morning. I'm Jason Vaughan, the Council Section 151 officer. this report in front of you today has got two elements to it. It's got my letter to DLUC of the 26th of September, and then it's also got a letter from Barry Morris of Grant Thornton to the Chief Exec, following on from that. So, and the committee are asked to consider this in terms of what actions you wish to take going forward. So my letter of the 26th of September on pages 23 to 27 outlines a number of the features that the new council has inherited. We are a new council. When you read through that letter, there are difficult challenges around each and every single one of those sort of items that I've identified. They're quite significant if they were one item, but actually when you bring them all together, they pose quite a challenging financial picture for us. The letter I also copied into Rob Whiteman, who's the Chief CEO of SITFA, and I shared it with both internal and external audit. And as a result of that, Barry Morris has now written a value for money letter to the Chief Exec, and I'll bring in Barry in a sec to provide any comments on that. So I think my letter is quite factual. Following the letter, DLUC did respond. We had an initial meeting with them on the 6th of October, and we've had further correspondence in the last week, and we'll be having more detailed meetings with them as we go forward as well, talking through our financial position with them. Barry, I'm looking at you. Did you want to comment on your letter and bring out any points from your side of things? And then I'm happy to take any questions from members and clarify any points.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Barry Morris. I'm the key audit partner for Grant Thornton. So as Jason said, we've maintained ongoing discussions regularly throughout the period of both prior to the inception of the council and in the months after that. And we've been keeping abreast of the developing situation in regards to the financial position of the authority. As soon as Jason wrote to the department advising that there was a risk that a Section 114 notice may be necessary, we considered our statutory responsibilities in determining whether or not we needed to exercise formal powers, recognising the gravity of the situation. What we've decided to do instead of exercising those statutory responsibilities at the moment is formally put on record our concerns that the council needs to take urgent action and ensure that that is embedded and understood across the organisation. We do recognise that the authority is a new authority and therefore forming its new arrangements, but it now needs to move at pace to make sure that sustainable financial savings can be delivered whilst maintaining the quality of public services, which is so important to local residents. This, I would emphasise, is a letter that, or similar letters have been sent to other authorities as well. So this is not just a Somerset issue. It does recognise that local government is facing a period of significant challenge. We are continuing to review the progress that's being made by the council to both address the in-year deficit and also the budget gap going forward. Jason?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Barry. The purpose of the letter to DLUC, and also there has been member briefings on this, is to outline the real challenges we face. A Section 114 notice is really a last resort. That is absolutely what you do when everything else has failed. It's not the position you really want to be in for all the consequences and additional costs it brings and the impacts that has upon services. So the purpose of my letter really was to clarify that the analogy I use is we're on the ship, we've spotted the iceberg. I think the recent updates to our financial picture means that iceberg is a lot closer than we initially thought, and therefore the actions we need to take in order to avoid hitting the iceberg are obviously more substantial and they need to be taken quicker. I think one of the key things I would say is that if you look at the councils that have issued Section 114 notices, they've been for very different reasons. I think some of the problems facing Somerset is we simply don't have enough money. Some of our costs are increasing substantially compared to our income. So there is a structural budget problem for how we run our services. that's a real fundamental thing, as opposed to we've done a single item that's caused our potential financial issues. So this is very much at that kind of very early warning. I think it's really important in my role as the council's Section 151 officer to actually do that very publicly and openly with members. I think one of the criticisms of some of the other councils that have found themselves in this position is it came as a shock to people. It almost came out of the blue. I don't think there's any member or officer within Somerset Council that could say that. That will attract us lots of attention. I think we've been lead on, I'm looking at Liz, on the news this morning. But actually, I think that's right. I think this should be done in the public gaze. We have got some issues. We need to get them out there publicly. So that's why we're bringing it here and why it's in front of Audit Committee today.
Thanks, Jason. So I think I will echo Jason's remarks there about the importance of communication through this process. The next 18 months for this council are going to be absolutely critical for the future of public services in Somerset. Audit Committee has a role here to make sure that the solutions are practical and workable and that they're actually delivered. So I'm going to bring Barry in a moment, but certainly from my point of view, I think it would be very helpful if the Audit Committee were to consider a special meeting at some point in perhaps December to consider this as a one item agenda, to look at the financial sustainability of the council, to review what best practice might look like, particularly for audit, to reflect on the learning from other councils that have found themselves in similar positions. It would be really useful, I think, to get people together to have that conversation. I think it would be helpful for us to review the current position, and when we get to that point, we'll have a bit more clarity after the review of the reserve has been completed. I think we'll know more about where the budget outturn position is at that point. I think it would be helpful if we had scrutiny invited to come along to that meeting, because clearly there's some overlap between our functions and the functions of the Corporate Resources Scrutiny Committee. It would be helpful to consider whether that would be appropriate to have them attend that meeting. Also, in the other councils that have found themselves in difficulty, they've been through a financial sustainability review. I think it would be useful to reflect on the learnings that those councils have made in those circumstances. We're not the first to find ourselves in this position, and we won't be the last to find ourselves in this position, but I think what we can do is to take what's gone before and to try and build on it to see if we can find ourselves in a better place. And also from my perspective, understanding what the differences are between a Section 114 and a capitalisation directive would be really helpful. That's my build as a chair. I think that would be a useful starting point, but I'll throw the discussion open to the committee now. I've got Councillor Coles and any other hands on this issue? Councillor Sully. Yeah. So that's my start for 10. I'm very happy to take amends.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to agree with that approach. I think it's the sensible and pragmatic approach. I have a very slight concern about the timing, and that is, I feel that we should consider waiting until we've had a proper response from central government, because we are not the only authority, as you rightly point out, that are having this issue, and we need to understand what assistance there may or may not be from the government.
Sorry, Simon, can you bring the mic a little bit closer to your?
Of course. Sorry, I thought I was close enough. Is that better? Yeah. Do you want me to repeat what? Okay. My apologies for that, Chair. I agree with the direction of travel. I think that's the right thing. My concern is we need a proper response from central government before we hold that larger single item agenda meeting with scrutiny, and I absolutely agree that's the right thing to do. But we need to do it when we have the information from central government. We're not the only organisation, we're not the only local authority that's in this position. And let's be honest, we've been placed there by central government. Inadequate funding over too many years has resulted in this, followed by 10% inflation, and COVID. It's the perfect storm, and we need government assistance to get us out of this, as do many other local authorities. We are not on our own here. There are, and the pattern must be obvious to central government, that their actions have caused this. Combined with COVID and 10% inflation. So I agree with you, but my caution is that we need to have proper responses from central government, which we are told might be delayed until the new year, which will make getting that budget through very, very tight in time. Thank you, Chair.
So understand the concern there. So Jason, did you want to come back on the timescales?
Yeah, so just to clarify a couple of things, we will have the Chancellor doing the autumn statement on the 22nd of November. That will set out the state of the nation's finances and will set out the departmental expenditure limits. So we'll understand what the funding for local government as a whole looks like. In terms of then the fundings for individual councils, that comes through the financial settlement for local government. That should be by the 7th of December each year. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case, and it's more likely to be just before Christmas, or even there are some rumours it might be even in January. That being said, I don't think we can delay. We can make a pretty good estimate of most of those figures already. There was quite a lot of indications of the funding for local government given in last year's settlement. For instance, we know what the referendum limits on council tax are. So they're 2.99% increase for next year. When you think inflation was in double digits at a 40-year high earlier this year, that emphasises why we got some of the problems we got with the costs going up by over 10% and your income through council tax, which is our biggest source of funding, going up by 3%. The sums don't add up in very simple terms. The other thing I would say is do not expect central government to ride over the hill and deliver us a big bag of money. I'm afraid if you do that, you'll be where some of the other previous councils have been. That was Northamptonshire's point of view. They no longer exist because they thought the government wouldn't let an authority fail. It is your responsibilities as councillors to address the situation. There may be some help from government in terms of some additional funding, but I wouldn't bank on it at this stage. The other thing we will be doing through DLUC is addressing the packages they could put in place, so a capitalisation direction. Again, that doesn't solve the problem. That merely gives you a way of manoeuvring around to get your house in order and sort things out. It is kind of the analogy I've used is going to the supermarket, buying your shopping and then asking them to add it to your mortgage rather than paying the bill off there and then. It is spreading the costs over the next 20 years, not dealing with the issues now. You can do that if you've got a clear plan of what you're going to do to keep within your financial envelope. So the emphasis on the members now and officers is to come up with a very clear plan of how we can balance our finances over the medium term. If we don't do that, I will be in the position where I have to issue a Section 114 statement. That will usually result in commissioners being appointed, and the council will look very differently after that, and the decisions the council makes will no longer be down solely to members, but driven by commissioners. So it's not a place we want to go.
Thank you, Jason. So I've got Councillor Sully, Councillor Chilcott. Anyone else?
Thank you, Chair. In Jason's letter about under the capital, I can't give you the page number because I haven't got a page number, but under the capital programme, one of the things Jason mentions about identifying schemes which could be stopped or de-scoped, including the town deals, Bridgewater and Glastonbury, and one levelling up project in Bridgewater. Regeneration is key for, I think, for our towns and our areas, that we don't stop regeneration because what it adds in value to the areas. Now, I thought these two schemes were funded by government, that we weren't contributing towards them. They were schemes that. So why would we stop those schemes or de-scope them? I just want to some clarity on it, because obviously that would raise hairs for people in Glastonbury and Bridgewater. Thank you.
So formal response from Jason or Liz? Liz?
As I sit on the Glastonbury Town Deal Board, I can give you some information there. That is a fixed amount of money from government. It's ring fenced. Where it sits in the reserves here, it's ring fenced. What has been happening though, and it won't surprise you, it'll be the same in Bridgewater, is projects have been de-scoped in order to stay within that allocation, or better, they've been able to raise funds from other sources in order to keep the ambition of their project, but also to keep it within budget. So there is complete understanding of where reserves are ring fenced. Thank you.
Yeah, Andy, come back.
So just to be clear, you're saying we won't stop them. We're just obviously got to redo the budget to spend what we've got in terms of making our money go as far as possible, not stopping any of these two.
No, not stopping those projects. So within the capital programme, we have projects that are fully funded, as many of the highways projects are, and those levelling up town deal projects. Then we have some projects that are partially funded, and you'll remember the conversations about the Octagon project, which is partially funded. And then we have some ambitious and smaller projects that are not funded at all and would require borrowing. So as we work through those, I think members of this committee are well savvy enough to realise that the ones that are fully funded will be easier in a way to deal with. The ones that are not funded will be judged on whether they're required for health and safety reasons and therefore a priority. The ones that are part funded, I would suggest, are the ones where we'll have to work hardest, because we don't want to pass up on the opportunity, but we understand the restrictions that we have on borrowing. I hope that makes sense, Chair.
Thank you. That's great, Liz. It gives me clarity of what we're doing. That's great. I've got a second question about capitalisation and raising money, because obviously there's predicted this £100 million deficit next year. Now, people, councillors have been talking that obviously what we've got to do is obviously sell assets, but to sell, even if we said sell £100 million worth of assets, it would take a long time. Probably we wouldn't do it in 3 months or 6 months, because from Somerset Western Towards point of view, we've got an asset that's probably 100 metres from here. We've been trying to sell it for the last 5 years for multi-millions, and we just haven't managed to get the deal over the line yet, but it may happen. So if we raised 100 million, you cannot use that in the revenue budget at the moment, I understand, obviously, because revenue and capital are separate. So if we was to use that 100 million, say if we could sell assets, we could reduce our overall borrowings down, but that would only save, say, like £5 or £6 million a year in terms of, say, interest costs. And that goes against the revenue budget. So sell £100 million worth of, I'm just using these figures to illustrate, you sell £100 million worth of assets. So your net benefit is you save £5 or £6 million, maybe £7 million on your interest, which reduces your revenue budget down. You've still got another 93 million to save. I cannot see how this council could save £100 million next year. I just can't comprehend it at the moment. So we do need to do some sort of capitalisation, in a sense, get some form. Some form of capitalisation directed from the government. I don't understand which form we would do, but we need to be able to use our capital if we can raise it for a revenue. But as we said, you can only do it once, so we're just kicking the can down the road. I don't know what plan, what can we do in order to get this £100 million down. I know we've got this 17-point plan that Liz has put forward, but everything takes time with councils to save money. I'm just uncomfortable how we're going to plug this £100 million gap, which we've got to do. Thank you.
Chair, although the Vice Chair is looking at me, I think a response would be better from the Chief Executive, Duncan Sharkey, please.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Duncan.
Yes, so that's the work we're doing. Well, I'm booming. I hope it's okay. That's the work we're doing right now. And we have got lots of activity ongoing, trying to identify where we can maybe find savings, where we can hold back commitments, where we can descope capital expenditure, where we can dispose of assets. So all of that work's ongoing. I think Mr. Vaughan's highlighted to the committee before the 17 points in the programme we were looking at to start with. That has expanded. I have to say, I agree. I don't yet know where we can save £100 million. And the problem we have is we have to do that in a recurring way, not a one-off way. So even disposal of assets, it will take, in my view, 2 to 3 years to see any significant capital receipts coming through from disposal of assets. And it's still not that straightforward because, of course, if we sell an asset, actually some assets are great to dispose of. Offices are a really good example because it costs us money to run the office. So as soon as we stop owning it, we stop spending that money. So there's a double benefit. You get the capital receipt and you get the revenue benefit. Some other assets actually make a return for us. So as soon as we sell them, we actually lose the revenue benefit and get the capital receipt to offset against the interest. The only way forward is going to be a combination of those issues. And the more we can save in a planned and deliberate way, the less we'll have to save by looking at effectively service reductions and cuts. And at this point in time, that's a question, I think, for the whole officer team about how do we get people to engage. If I could, while I've got the floor, Chair, just to expand the thought, I think my concern, honestly, is this is an immature organisation. We've got 5 different organisations coming together with very different cultures, very different abilities to actually deliver savings of this scale quickly and safely. We've got different parts of the organisation of different pressure in terms of financial position they started in and what they're seeing happening in their specific areas. And actually, it's just damaging our ability to quickly get to the programme we need to. We still have people who are in effectively their original role from district councils waiting to go through a process to put them into the new structures. And that means that the cascade all the way through is difficult. I can hear one councillor whispering too slow, but actually that is the business case that people set out for us to deliver, and that's what we've been trying to do. So, the legal requirements of going through all those HR processes, Chair, mean that we have to go through 45-day consultations, for example, before we can move anything forward. So it has been very slow, but what that means is we don't have everyone in the place you'd like to have them in to actually be having this conversation. So that increases the risk to the council even further right now.
Thanks, Duncan. So I've got a little queue now. So I've got Habib, I've got Mandy, I've got Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is clear from what I've noticed with LGA report that social care has had a huge impact from 21 to 22 till basically now and next year. The cost has gone up by 27% and homelessness by just over 35%. So when you look at those figures, there are huge numbers. And we need to come up with solutions. We cannot actually sit back and sort of, the government has got to come up with some sort of help and support, and we've got to do something. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll give you 2 examples of what's on the small medium enterprises that I've seen to reform locally, and also on the corporate side. Basically, end of September, I, along with 2 other colleagues, were invited to a relaunch of a business in my division. A number of NHS consultants ran a business restaurant in the southwest, and COVID hit really hard. So they had to reevaluate. They had to sort of, and so did the hospitality business. So they had to reevaluate, and they had to sort of come up with a business model that actually worked for them. And they came up with an idea of actually frozen food, and now they're hoping to supply the rest of UK with their products. So that's on the small medium enterprises. That what they did, they had an issue. They looked at that as an opportunity rather than actually a problem, and they reevaluated and sort of moved forward. I can say the same thing about Rolls-Royce. Back in 2021, they had a deficit of 5.3 billion. They reevaluated and they actually managed to reduce that by 2 billion. And that was asset as well as staff and everything else. So potentially, I know there are private sector, two different examples, but as well as looking at the government, I feel that, we need to learn from private sector and sort of start performing likewise, that unless we actually do something like that, we are not going to survive. So that are, there are two different examples, one locally, one globally, that potentially we can actually learn from and move forward. So just the, these are not questions, but just the observations that, I think it might be worth, looking at. Thank you.
Point well made, Habib. I think Chief Executive actually has the need for a new target operating model for the council on the agenda. So that would address the point about, for example, reviewing the business case that you mentioned. The council needs to work in a fundamentally different way. We need to take advantage of new technology, and we need to look at what is sustainable for the council to deliver going forward. So I think that piece of work is in train, but we perhaps need to think about how that gets reported back and what visibility audit committee may need of that. But I've got Mandy next and then Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, as you'd expect. Do you want me to just do a few and then come in at the end? I'm just conscious I don't want to take everybody else's questions. So my first was in response to your suggestion, Chair. I'd have a slight reservation in that, yes, there absolutely should be a one-item meeting. I don't know when you time that, because it would actually be helpful to be looking at our quarterly figures, and they won't actually come through till Jan time. Failing that, you'll be looking at 6 months, which would be quite out of date. So I think you might want to look at your timing. And the second concern, I suppose, is there's a really tentative difference between scrutiny and audit function. We are here for assurance, scrutiny are not. So my suggestion would be, if you will allow, is I think we should have a one-item audit committee and all councillors should be invited. I think it's that important. I don't think it should just be one scrutiny. I think this is every councillor's business. So that's my first response to that.
I think that's a fair build, Mandy. I'm quite happy to take that one on board in terms of the overlap between scrutiny and audit. That's fine. As far as the timing goes, I think we'll work with officers to try and find the optimum opportunity. I understand that there's some papers coming to exec in December, which will be informative and helpful for us to consider as well. So if you want to come back on your next question.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important because we need that vision of the capital as well as the revenue, which only comes out in quarterly reports. So right, I'll start kicking on with my questions. So capital programme mentioned in the letter, costs of 430 million. Is this affordable? It's the 151.
Jason?
It's hard to give a one-word answer to that. So within the capital programme, you've got a whole mixture of things. You've got some fully funded schemes, such as the town deals, such as some of the highway stuff. You have also got quite a lot of underlying borrowing in there as well. That's the bit that actually isn't affordable in the scope of things. That's the bit where we need to review the programme and take out those schemes that we can do that require borrowing. Clearly within the capital programme, some of those schemes are underway and actually would cost you more to get out of them rather than continue with them. But that's the piece of work that's being done at the moment. Very much focused on those schemes that got borrowing costs and therefore revenue implications, and trying to reduce those down.
We also need to consider the impact of delivering some of those projects in terms of, Andy mentioned the economic value and regeneration impact of some of the schemes. So in some respects, actually spending money now can help to generate more long-term revenue in terms of higher business rates, receipts, and potentially reductions in costs for other services which may be required down the line. So I think we need to take a holistic view of those projects, not simply looking at the short-term cost, but looking at the long-term value in some of these items. Sorry, Mandy, do you want to come back on Jason's response there?
Yeah, I think probably on your response, Chair, I don't think we've got the luxury of time to think about very long-term savings a long way down the line. We've got 100 million to face. So whilst it's really important, you know, we are in a financial crisis, and I think decisions have to be made. And whilst it can be considered, the immediacy is to sort the budget out. So just soft challenge back.
I think that's a fair challenge, Mandy. But at the end of the day, we aren't just running a spreadsheet. We are running a council which touches the lives of you know nearly 500,000 people. So you know I think we have to consider what the long term strategy for Somerset looks like. And if commissioners are brought in, commissioners will take absolutely the approach that you've mentioned there about you know chopping the heads off everything in order to make the short term numbers balance. But we have to consider now what is in the best interest of Somerset. And you know, it's not. We may have a difference of approach here, and that's you know entirely fine. But I think that's why I'd like to bring a discussion on this single item so that we can air what the balance of views looks like here. You know, I'm happy to be in a minority of one. If nobody agrees with me, I'm absolutely used to that, and I don't mind. But I think it's important that we air all views. Okay. Sorry.
Thank
Did you have further questions?
Please never let it be said I think about it. It's just a balance sheet, because that is absolutely.
Yeah,
not
no,
the
sorry.
good
It wasn't a dig at
Thank
you
you.
personally.
But similarly, we need to keep control in Somerset for the people of Somerset, so we keep our decisions in Somerset, and that's where I'm coming from, whatever. So my second question is around the commercial portfolio. The purchase price in the letter says 289 million. The value is reduced to 220 million. That's almost 70 million pounds of loss to the taxpayers in Somerset. Is there a risk that this council will end up servicing a 50-year debt and thereby putting further long-term pressure on this council?
So just as a challenge back,
yeah.
That's not lost to the taxpayer. So if you buy a house, the only 2 days that it matters what it's worth are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. And it's the same with commercial assets. Some of these were bought on a long-term basis. Some of them were made to generate revenue. Some were there for capital appreciation. There's a mixture of performance across the commercial portfolio. So some assets are performing quite well, as far as I understand it. Some are performing less well. We're in a difficult stage of the economic cycle at the moment, with interest rates being high. So, for example, commercial property values have been hit quite badly as a result of that. Now wouldn't be the optimum time to divest of some of these assets. So I think the council has got in place a board to look at how we dispose of these assets, and officers want to confirm that.
Council will be putting in place.
Yes, so council is putting in place a board to look at how we optimise these assets in the long term. But in terms of has the money been lost? No, the loss is only there if you crystallise it by selling it now. It's not a loss to taxpayers at this moment in time, because you still hold the asset. I don't know if anyone wants to.
The debt still has to be serviced through our revenue.
Yes, the debt still has to be serviced through revenue. That's without a doubt. Liz, did you want to come back?
And the really good questions about the commercial investments, and we know why councils bought commercial investments, to protect the services they deliver. So we acknowledge that. We also acknowledge where we are in an economic cycle, which is not a good place. Some of those assets have appreciated in value, not as many as one might hope, but we have already in a closed session considered one of those. We will have, we are looking at an executive subcommittee for the commercial investments, so that can move outside of the monthly executive cycle of meetings. There are others where the leases are longer and the income is protected by inflationary I'm not sure, I'm looking at Sarah Wakefield, she may know the correct terms as a property lawyer, but because the leases are protected from inflation, they are bringing in more in revenue than they are costing in borrowing, even when the borrowing is refinanced. So what I'm trying to say is we need to be super smart about how we look at disposal of those commercial investments, because if you sell at the bottom of the market, the ones that have got longer leases and are bringing in better income, you're not doing any of the residents of Somerset a favour. So we need to consider it, in my opinion, on a case by case basis, with the relevant professional advice, both on property and on legal and on financing, for how it affects our statement of accounts. So Ros Wyke, as the lead member for assets, is well used to dealing with all of this from her professional life. And so if she were here, I'm sure she would add to my answer. Sarah Wakefield is associate lead member. She was previously commercial property lawyer, and it may be that Sarah is able to offer some more of the answer.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for attending today. If you'd like to add.
Yeah, just to add to what's been said, that, you know, commercial property investments are generally long term. You don't, you know, you work them, you sell them when you can get a profit, but you can't hang on to them. And I just want to make the point in reply to the question that the loss in value is not crystallized until you sell them. So their values are going up and down all the time in the marketplace. And on a particular day, it might be worth one thing, it might be worth something else. And it depends on how the market is working. And we are looking at these commercial investments very carefully as to which ones might be suitable for sale, bearing in mind that some of them bring in very good income to the council. So yes, it's not brilliant. And being a commercial property investment body as a council may not be now what the government wants us to do, or indeed what SIPFA wants us to do. But the fact is, we own these properties and we need to look at them professionally and properly over a period of time. There will be no flash sale, I can assure you of that.
Sorry, Mandy, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you very much. I understand it's difficult. I just would like to understand offline, if necessary, if you sell at a loss, how that impacts going forward, really, because there is a risk of that for some, possibly. So if I could understand that offline, that would be helpful. Thank you. So next question is around the 5 million savings for Newton. These were originally budgeted into this year's budget. Now it's looking to be pushed forward to next year's budget. How much have we saved year to date with Newton, and how much confidence does our 151 officer have that those savings will materialise next year? And I ask because it's in the letter and it was a big figure within the budget savings. Thank you.
Yeah, so the business case for the work that Newton Europe are doing was a cost to us of £7 million. And as has been said earlier in this committee, that's performance related. And that was based on delivering £10 million over 2 financial years. And that was what was built into the budget and the financial strategy. That has not proved to be the case in terms of the timing. So within the current year, you see that in the budget monitoring reports, there is a shortfall against the £5 million that's in the current year. I think 200,000 is the figure that's quoted. I think that will go up slightly during the year, but it won't be anywhere near the £5 million. I think there is confidence that the £10 million in total by the end of next year will be delivered. They have a higher stretch target actually above the £10 million that we haven't built into our financial plans yet. But clearly, it's quite an area we will need to monitor really closely over the next, every month effectively, to make sure it is still on track in delivering what we expect it to deliver, because they're big numbers.
Thank you. One to watch, I think, and I hope that it does deliver for the sake of next year's budget. That being said, sadly, with 100 million now, that becomes more and more, or less and less effective towards bridging that gap, sadly, with the increased pressures we've got next year. So next question is month 5 report, I think, is stating, and we're talking about 100 million, whether we call it 99 or 100 million, but the letter here talks about 20 million less. Is that just because there's been sort of movement since you pulled together the information for this letter?
So different things. So in terms of the current year's budget monitoring, and I remember I wrote this letter a few weeks ago, we were projecting that to be £30.3 million overspend in the current year. We, as a result of one of the 17 key areas, we've done a bit of a deep dive on the treasury management activities and our projected cash flows. That's proved to be more advantageous to us, improve the picture. So the picture for month 5 report that will be going to executive on the 6th of November and scrutiny the following day, if I've got the right date, or 8th of November, scrutiny the following day, will show £27.3 million in the current year. The projection for next year, so the 24-25 budget gap, at the moment when I wrote the letter, I was saying I think it's around 80 million. It is 100 million. That is the figure today, but there is an awful lot of activity going on literally in this building today with lots of service challenge sessions. I expect that figure to come down. The issue is I don't expect it to come down to naught. I expect it to come down to maybe the sort of 70 to 80 million pounds sort of range, but that's still a substantial budget gap. So the report to the executive on the update to the financial strategy that will go to the November executive and also on to scrutiny the following day, we'll talk about the 100 million. And then in December, for the 6th of December executive, we will have the updated picture taking into account all the activities and works that have happened today. So I'd expect it to be less than 100 million, but I need to say to members, it will not be naught. It will be north of at least 50 million.
Thank you for that response. So that leads me really to the next sort of question. So I think going back when you were looking at the initial in-year challenges, there were 3 points that were in the report, and one was to gain some early momentum for the plans. I think that was going to be planned over the summer. The next was updating all the figures and getting a hold of them, which I think you've said is work that's going on. And I think the third option at that point was looking at savings options. I think that was the 3 things you were looking at from memory. So time's passed, a few months since then. And I said at the time, the 17 key actions did not have figures or deadlines attached to them. 1 or 2 did, most did not, which I found quite challenging to work out how you were going to sort the budget out when there weren't figures and dates attached to it. There weren't figures or timescales. So how are the 17 actions going? How much have they saved? And will those actions be sufficient? Bearing in mind, since those actions started coming into place, we've seen a continual deterioration of the in-year position. So that's a lot of words, but I hope you've got the gist of what I'm saying.
Yeah, so in the report that we're going to executive at the beginning of November, I can't remember if it's the 6th or 8th, I think it is the 8th. That will set out that I think progress has been slower than I anticipated on these areas. We have not made the headway that I expected to do, and I think it fits in with the Chief Exec's comments of this being an immature organisation. I think that has delayed things. We haven't made the progress I would expect to make. On those 17 areas, some of them were not related in terms of delivering savings, but they were about, if I call it good financial management, the things you would look to put in place. There are a couple of the activities that have progressed. So reviewing grants to the voluntary sector, for instance, that has been done. There has been some progress around those. As I said, on treasury management, there has been quite a substantial saving, £3 million that's feeding through to the budget monitoring. On the number of the others, progress has definitely been a lot slower than I anticipated, and we haven't seen significant savings come forward or precise savings levels. As a result of that, we have put another range of activities in place. So we have formed a financial focus group that meets twice a week now to drive this across the organisation. This is the #1 priority for the council to get on top of this. I think getting momentum behind that has proved to be difficult. And our timescale for doing all this, obviously, the end point is February meeting of full council. There's quite a lot of build up to that. In reality, by the December report to executive, we needed to have made significant progress on most of this. We won't have the government settlement by then, but the rest of the stuff, we need to have some real clear direction, real hard numbers starting to emerge that I can sign off in February as being robust. That is proving to be very challenging.
Thank you. Just the last one, but
one of the challenges I know that you're facing, Jason, is actually knowing the starting point by being able to sign off some of the outstanding audits. That will presumably help you to get to a more robust figure. Is that right? Correct?
Yeah, I think one of the risks that we have is not having prior year accounts signed off, which is why we've put quite a lot of effort in to try and get particularly those. I have to really concentrate on which financial years I'm talking about now. We inherited some from 2021 and 21-22, getting those across the line as soon as possible. Getting the 22-23 accounts published has been a real push as well. We are the only new unitary council that have managed to do that for all the predecessor bodies. Our other colleagues elsewhere in the country haven't managed to do that. We've obviously want to get those audits completed as well, because it's more risk to me in terms of knowing precisely what my reserve numbers are and things like that. There could be some things identified in those accounts that change, that suddenly either they might make my position better. Usually my experience is they tend to make it worse, not better, if we're being honest about it. So that does present a real risk, which is why we've had such a focus on trying to get those done.
Andy?
last one.
Yep.
Thank you. Be pleased to know. Firstly, thanks for the transparency with you and the team, Jason. I think it's really important that everybody understands. Doesn't save a penny, but it does mean we do understand, and I would encourage all councillors to understand the pressures that we're under. So within your letter, it says, I'm not confident that we will see a significant reduction, and that was relating to children's and adults overspend. And I think, bearing in mind, we've also heard, and I've listened to the responses, that this is seen as an, I think the word was immature organisation. We've seen the level of savings we need to make, not only this year, but next year. And we've heard that the 17 actions probably aren't delivering as fast as was originally hoped. So I think for me, the iceberg's in front of us, but our ship's burning behind us and we're all watching the iceberg. I think we are in a difficult place. But from what I've heard personally, and we're looking for assurance within this committee, I do not have confidence that this budget's under control. I don't have confidence that it will come in on budget this year when I look at the actions that were there. And I think every day at the moment brings us closer to 114. And the challenge with your budget is the less time that you have, the more difficult those decisions become. And I think that time is becoming ever shorter from what I've seen and heard today. And thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
No, Mandy, I think that's an absolutely vital point that's been well made there. If we save make a recurring saving now, then we get the benefit in this financial year and next financial year. If we only make that recurring saving next year, then we've missed out on potential savings this year. So I think we do have to look very carefully at those figures. And my understanding is that the MTFP board is meeting regularly to highlight some of these opportunities. Liz, I'll bring you in as a direct response to Mandy's question, and I've got Lee, and then I've got Habib, and then I've got Lindy. And anyone else that wants to speak? And Steve.
Thank you, Chair. There's some kind of irony, isn't there, that in the work that officers have been doing diligently, carefully, to look for savings, what we actually now understand is that the prices paid for placements in previous years were lower than in other counties. And so as we've come through COVID, the beginning of the fair cost of care, but not the completion of that work by government, we're now in a more exposed position with a better understanding than we were before. So when we look at a price per bed per week, and we were looking at what was budgeted in 21, 22 and 22, 23, and we compare that with the price that we're paying in Somerset now, and indeed that other counties have been paying within Somerset for some time, and self-funders have been paying even more, that has exposed us to the market much more. And the irony is that that has been properly exposed and therefore planned for the future during an exercise that was designed to look for savings. So for me as lead member, I look at it and I think, we need to know this, we need to understand it, but that is not what we were looking for. That is not what we were hoping for, but we have to address it. And you're absolutely right that the longer we sit on things without actions, the worse our situation becomes. But I can assure you that all of those things you've listed, and I don't know if Duncan wants to cover this at all, but members of Duncan's executive leadership team are being detailed to each of those reviews and are well into that work already. We're waiting now until November executive and then December executive to see the results of that. We're also waiting to see further results of Jason's and it will be Duncan as chief executive to communications with government and where other councils are going too. So hearing from leaders of other councils at the moment is equally interesting, as you can imagine.
Okay. Duncan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the pressures on adults and children's are what's clearly driving the issue, and it's actually relatively complicated. It depends how you want to look at it. So I couldn't give you things. I was just looking to see if I've got them with me, but I don't have them to hand. But adults and children's services have overspent for the last, I think, at least 3 years, some of which was disguised by COVID grants in 2021. So there is an issue that the budget doesn't look like it was ever properly set, and therefore problems have been building up within there. The thing that seems to be particularly driving the issue in adults, however, as Councillor Lation covered, is a government policy called fair cost of funding. If everyone remembers, the government going to eliminate unfairness and fix the social care crisis. So what they wanted to do was councils to publish what we thought the fair cost of funding should be if we didn't receive any subsidy from people who were paying the care companies privately, to enable us to maybe get better rates for large volumes of discounts. That was published before government abandoned the policy, but what that looks like is over the last 4 years, our costs of care for a residential placement, for example, have gone from a feature card of somewhere around £570 per week for a residential placement to a forecast for next year of £975. So we're actually talking about, not doing the maths in my head, we're talking about 80% plus increase over a 4-year period, and that's not sustainable. Now, had we seen that coming in terms of being able to forecast that was the impact on the market, not sure we could have done, but had we seen that coming, we maybe, as I think Councillor Chilcott was quite rightly saying, would have been able to say for the last few years, actually we need to put more money into the budgets because the costs are going up in future years, and we could have spread the impact over a longer time. With the new council, we have absolutely no time to do that. It's hitting us now. So I think there's lots of different ways of looking at the problem, and all of them are true. But what we need to do is actually work out what we can do to fix it. What we patently can't do is get the rates back down to where they were. The government have let the genie out of that bottle. There's no way we can fix it. And that means we have to work out how within the resources we've got, we can do that. I would just say, picking up a point Mr. Vaughan made earlier, the government are not going to come and save us. There are hundreds of councils in a similar position. And if the government starts saving one here and one there, they'll have to do it for everyone. There is a system problem. Our costs are going up massively quicker than the income we can raise to, because of the cap particularly, to offset that. So therefore every council eventually will be issuing a section 114. The issue for us is the cost on social care compared to budget figures right now is actually exhausting our ability to keep up.
Mandy, I'm going to move on to Lee now. If you want to come back in a minute, I'll let you, but I just need to get other people in first. So Lee.
Thanks, Chair, and it's clear to see that every member around this table is really concerned at the situation, and I do like coming into comment after my esteemed colleagues, because they've taken the words out of my mouth and done a bit of a meatloaf. Nevertheless, I'm going to mention one thing, and I'm going to mention my nan always used to say, look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves, and I always remember that. So where we've talked about it's going to be difficult to save 100 million in one go, I think it's, you know, small measures. But one thing I was going to look at, and I did look at, was the borrowing, the current borrowing situation we've got with the PWLB and all our other lenders. Putting my bank manager's hat on, and I know Mandy was a bank manager, we got Simon Carswell online who's a bank manager. Putting my bank manager's hat on, I wonder if there's any merit having a look, and I'm sure this is one of the 17 factors you've got, of looking at the refinance options with all the borrowing we've got, taking into account the PWLB regulations have changed since we took out the borrowing, the CIS, etc. The other thing is, as banks, we've got a responsibility to treat customers in financial difficulties with fairness. Now, you could argue the council here is in financial difficulties, and as such, we use the F word in banking, which is forbearance. And I just wonder whether the council has considered perhaps looking at the borrowing, approaching the borrowers that we've got, the lenders, sorry, we've got, and explain the situation. There may be ways to look at interest only, spreading borrowing over longer terms, going interest only on some of our borrowing, that may well help us with our, with our lending and our borrowing overall. I know we're not a personal customer, so the CIFID rules would act differently. I understand that under FCA, but the principle's the same. And if we're in financial difficulties, which we are, our lenders will still have a legal obligation to help us out. So that's just one point. The rest has been duly mentioned by my previous colleagues. So thank you for letting me have a comment, Chair. Thank you.
Jason, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the areas in terms of looking at the treasury management area is got to be done. Part of the problem is actually understanding. We're reviewing the capital program, for instance, where how much we build in use of reserves impacts upon all of those figures. So there's lots of moving parts to this at the moment, but absolutely is an area we will look at. One of the ironies, of course, is if you were to approach the government through DLUC to have some financial support, they do allow you to borrow from PWLB for revenue expenditure, the capitalisation direction. They actually charge you 1% extra above PWLB rates because you are in financial difficulty. I'm struggling to put that bit together, but that's just a reality. But absolutely, it is one of the, on the 17, it's one of the areas we are constantly refining and looking at.
Okay. I've got Habib and then Lindy, and then I want to try and bring us back to a resolution, if that's okay. So, Habib.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually refer to the double F and G word, the financial focus group that Jason Ashty alluded to. Is that officer driven, or is it members driven? Is it members and officers driven? Is it members and officers and private sector driven? How does it actually work, and what is the outcome? I mean, you meet twice a week. Is there an outcome and decision that actually follows that? How does it work?
So the financial focus group is an officer group. It's set up along the lines you would set up an emergency response. So like if there was a flooding incident. So it is very much a command and control type of approach. It is meets on a Tuesday and a Friday. It's either chaired by Nicola or myself. And as a result of that, there are a huge number of actions that are coming out of that we are tasking people across the organisation to do as a priority. In terms of what some other councils have done, so Southampton's the one I'm aware of it that's put this in place before a Section 114. They've got there is an improvement board. That's where they've brought in business experts, sector experts across the piece to look at the finances and generally the governance actually is a little bit tied into that across the piece. That maybe there's something that council wants to consider at some stage. I point members to look at Southampton one because that's the one. That's the only one I know that's done it voluntary before they've issued a 114. But the financial focus group is purely an officer group responding to, inverted commas, the financial emergency, directing and tasking people to get on and do things by a particular day.
Thanks, Jason. So, Lindy.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, the work of Newton Europe, I wasn't privy to what they've done, but did it include a revenue enhancement strategy specifically for Somerset Council to identify additional revenue streams and to become self-sustainable? I think central government will have a softer approach if we can show a plan in place how we will survive and become self-sustainable, even if it takes 100 years. And how we are forward thinking in tackling these issues. So it's the revenue enhancement strategy. And then I wanted to know about if you've got a return on investment strategy, or you do calculations with regards to that on your assets. I am listening to a audio book called Profit First. And sometimes you just grasp at all the money that's coming in, but the driving force behind that is actually costing you money. It's important to look at your assets and to do a real deep dive into what is really a return on your investment. Is it really that profitable? Hence the name Profit First book. And then the last thing is, when you do the presentation to your executive on the budget monitoring, if it would be allowed that it would be circulated to the whole committee before we have that meeting, where we're going to tackle the financial issues, so that we can just have a good idea of each line item, where it's planned with a quarterly update of the finances, budgeted actuals and deviations and reasons for deviations, as well as also how the 17 priorities fit into that budget monitoring sheet. If you can circulate that to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, so quite a few bits in there. So the easier bits to deal with are the requests to circulate information. So I assume that will be okay. Yeah. And then the more difficult questions around Newton in particular. Did you want a specific response on that, Lindy? Or yeah.
Yeah. So everything we're doing is very much in the public domain. So I can point you to all the reports and the links and send you all of those. So you can see them in terms of the budget monitoring and all of those things. The Newton Europe work, it was subject to a business case. So again, I can point you to that. It is about reducing our costs, our future cost projections, rather than delivering new income streams. So it's about reducing demand for adult social care, lowering therefore the cost burden upon the council. So that's what's behind that business case. But the point you were making around government, if we're seeking government support, and if we were to avoid a section 114 statement, we will actually need a very clear plan of how we are financially sustainable going forward. If we haven't got that, that puts a very much a burden both upon me, and I don't think DLUC would support you if you didn't have that clear plan. So that's a clear piece of work that we need to do. What does the future look like for Somerset Council, and how can it live within its means of a reduced sort of resourcing envelope? How does it reduce down its costs to fit within that? It's going to be quite a challenge to get in place in February.
And I would like to say, if you want to catch Councillor Dean Ruddle after the meeting as the lead member for adult social care, I'm sure he'd be delighted to talk to you about the Newton project in more detail.
I'm really struggling to hear what's going on, so I didn't understand what you said, but I'm happy to talk to you. Sorry, I didn't hear it. So yeah.
If you take it out of the meeting, that would be helpful. Yeah. I've got Steve next. Okay.
Is it possible to expand the risks associated with the high needs block? It seems to be a secondary iceberg that's just around the corner there, and whether this can be rolled back, or is there opportunity for rolling back this date? Thank you.
Yep, Jason. I think it's the placement costs as well as the high needs block, isn't it? That are particular challenges on children's budgets.
Yeah, the high needs block, you're right, it is the second iceberg. Absolutely, that's a very good description. At the moment, most upper tier authorities are running at significant deficits. You'll see ours just below £30 million at the start of this year. It will increase, and it's projected to increase quite significantly up to £100 million by the time the statutory override ends. That's where the government have passed some legislation to effectively say, just ignore it and pretend it's not there and disclose it somewhere else on your balance sheet. It really is still there. It will be something we have to deal with at some stage. There are quite a lot of discussions nationally how they deal with this. I don't think there is the answer there yet, but you're absolutely right to flag it. This is another major issue that we are going to have to deal with. There was an all-member briefing a couple of weeks ago on this, and can certainly share the slides on that. That actually added some meat to the bones. It is a national problem though, and something once we dealt with this immediate fire is the kind of next fire along the line.
Okay, Steve. I'd like to try and move us to a resolution now, if that's okay. So I started this item by suggesting that we might be able to get a special meeting in the agenda, possibly for December, to look at where we go next with financial sustainability. Is that something that in principle the committee is willing to support? Yeah, seeing general nods of assent. So if we work together with officers to try and find the optimum timing for that, then we'll circulate dates as soon as possible. As far as the content for that meeting goes, my proposal was to look at a review of the current position, which will have data from the December exec meeting by then. There'll be some challenges around the capital programme and where we are with that, which we may need to look at, see if we can get some interim figures potentially. Is that something that members would welcome? Yes, Mandy?
Can I just say again, bringing back that scrutiny audit function, we are looking for assurance, reassurance, etc., which is a tentatively different thing. So I think if you're going to invite all members, it'd be just helpful for them to understand, I suppose, the function of the audit committee. I hope that's helpful because
I think that's helpful, Mandy. So I think in the invite that we put out to all members, we'll need to tightly define what we're trying to achieve by having that meeting. I know members are subject to the finance briefings as well. This is different to that. This is about how we look to get assurance that the recovery plan is in place and how audit fulfills its functions going forward. In particular, I'd like to hear from external auditors in particular about what best practice looks like for audit going forward in situations of this nature. So are there things that we could be doing that we're not doing? Are there things that we're doing that we shouldn't be, etc.? So is that something that we might be able to get, Barry? Yeah. You. Then the financial sustainability reviews which have happened elsewhere. I know Jason's team are looking to pull those together to understand some of the learning from that. I think it would be useful for us to understand what a financial sustainability review looks like. Is that something that members would welcome? Yes, no, do you want more information?
I was just contemplating as you said that. I don't know whether sort of some training offline, I wasn't sure whether that information needed to be in a public domain or whether a session online that everybody could dial into would be a more effective way. That was
so we can look at pulling that item out and holding some separate training on that. And I know that we still got some training that we flagged last month that we need to schedule in as well. And then the final bit for me was what section 114 looks like in practical terms versus a capitalisation directive, just so that all members are clear on what the difference is between the two and what the benefits of each might be. Mandy?
Thank you. If it helps, Chair, I think that has been touched on in some of the members' briefing sessions already. We've had quite an in-depth bit on it, but I think it might be helpful to perhaps do a session just covering that, because there were lots of councillors from memory cancellation that weren't there, so it's trying to get as many as you can to understand.
Okay, so we'll look at that and see if do you think that needs to be a separate session or
there are a number of budget sessions already in the diary. I'm just conscious of the officers and how pushed their time is. Could it link with one of the sessions you're already running?
Okay,
Jason?
so we'll look at maybe including that in one of the existing finance briefings then. Is there anything else that we could usefully put into that meeting that members would welcome or that officers think would add value? No, there was a suggestion that we might get some of the directors here to talk about how. Sorry, Duncan, do you want to come in on that?
Sorry, I forgot we hadn't mentioned that bit. Yeah, so I think if you're having the meeting, it might be helpful to bring the directors from the main spending departments in to actually be here to support the conversation. And I think, you know, as a team, we're very happy to do that if that helps.
Yep, members welcome that. Mandy?
Challenge for me with that is within that 17-point plan, it was quite difficult to know what those directors are working to, and you've obviously had lots of offline conversations. So for me, I just need some background on what you're asking them to do. And for me, the assurances round is, are they able to, will it make the savings? So at the moment, there's some work going on that I'm not cited on, and neither will most of the committee be, but it's very difficult to challenge them if you don't know what task they've been set to challenge them on to get that assurance. Chair, does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think we could perhaps look at that as part of the reports that would be prepared for that meeting, and then you get the ability to ask questions of the directors in terms of their confidence about delivering against that plan. So would that make sense as an option?
Yeah, if I could, I think I'm very happy to. The directors, I'm sure, will be explaining what they're doing, but I think the task's quite straightforward. Directors are not being tasked to go away and do this thing or that thing. Directors are being tasked to come up with sensible savings proposals that close the budget gap and manage their own budgets in line with the budget that was set. And I think that's the challenge that needs to be put into people. It isn't that, you know, Jason and I sat and written a plan that says, please go away and do this and it will be fine. We don't have that plan. What we're saying to the organisation as a whole is, what can we do to fix this problem? That's, I think, the challenge that the committee should be putting to the directors, and the directors should be able to answer that. Some of that is contain their own spend within their existing budgets, which are the budgets they told us last year they needed. Some of that is explaining where that's not possible, what they're doing in the balance of their budgets to try and reduce the impact on the wider council of those changes.
Okay, so in light of Duncan's comments there, would that be helpful to have the directors at that meeting? Yes. Okay, fine. So let's, if you're happy with the set of proposals I put to you, we need to get the monitoring officer to. I found out that I, as the chair, don't have the power to call a meeting. That the monitoring officer has the power to call the meeting, and we have to ask the monitoring officer nicely if we can have a meeting. So, with your permission, I will take that to the monitoring officer as a proposal, and we'll work it up to try and make it of most value to everyone.
Saying yes.
Sorry. Oh, great! So the deputy has monitoring officer has given me a special permission to ask for a meeting. Thank you. We'll work that up and we'll circulate information as soon as possible. I recognise that December is never going to be a popular time to hold a meeting, so we'll do our best and we'll get as many people there as we can do. But I think in light of the fact that this is priority one for the organisation, we've spent nearly 2 hours pretty much debating this single item. I think there's an appetite to look at this in greater detail. We just need to make the agenda relevant and focused. So thank you for your comments and contributions. So on that point, can I take general assent that that's agreed? Yeah. Okay. Fine. We'll take that forward. So in terms of the formal recommendations in the agenda for item 6, so we've considered the section 151 officers letter. I think we've given that a good airing. We've had some brief conversations regarding the response from our external auditors. Is everyone happy to note where we are with that? Andy?
I hear that, but for me, I still haven't got assurance, which is what we're here to do. So could we send a note back, at least to say the committee's concerned with what they've heard today, you know, so that it's minuted, that we understand the challenges. And at the moment, we've heard from the 151 to say, you know, it doesn't think children's and adults can come back in budget. We've heard a lot. And for me, I think as a committee, we need to acknowledge the risk to this council from what we've heard.
So
today.
I think we are acknowledging the risk by putting an additional meeting in. We've asked for additional information to seek that assurance. So I think that is part of our response to these concerns. Yeah, Liz, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Chair, in the paper that Jason is in the middle of writing for the next executive meeting, there's the opportunity to feedback from audit within that paper, and as well as the updated risk register entries too. So I think we need to make sure that audit committee's concerns and recommendations are very clearly expressed in the paper.
Yeah, I think we are concerned. I think that is the general consensus of the meeting. I'm not hearing anyone saying this is not a problem. I'm not hearing anyone here that say that this is not an urgent issue. So is there anything else that we could usefully do to recognise that concern, Mandy?
Thanks for your forbearance, Chair. We'll use the F word. I have to come back to my comment, and I'm sorry I keep going there. I do not have confidence that the budget is controlled. I have not heard that there's a way to bring this year in on budget, and I have not heard that those actions are delivering at pace that's been needed. That's come from the 151. So I would like that to be made very clear in the paper that, you know, from what we are hearing, and I am basing all on fact and what we've been presented with and what's been said today. I don't think we can have assurance that the budget's going to come in this year. I don't think that'll be a surprise to anybody, but I also haven't got the assurance that the actions put in place are going to be able to correct that by year end. And I think that's factual. I think that's what's before us.
So I think in terms of moving this on, I as chair will reflect your concerns and will write formally to Jason to put that on record on behalf of the committee. I think, is that a reasonable way forward? Yeah. Okay. Fine. In terms of the forward plan, I think we know where we're headed. We'll keep you updated, but are members happy that we can move on from here now? Yeah. Okay. Right. So moving on to item 7, which is the internal audit progress report. I'm hoping this is going to be a fairly light one, Alistair.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, you're lucky you're going to Carlisle in a minute, but the rest of us haven't brought our sleeping bags.
Yes, Alistair Woodland from Swap Audit Services. Yeah, this is a brief update from me. You'd be glad to hear, given that it's come so soon after your September update. So I'll just go through what I think are the important points to bring to your attention. And the main thing on this paper is looking forward and where our time is going to be spent and giving that assurance to this committee, given what's already been discussed on the first few items on this agenda. Obviously, financial governance assurance is something that's going to be very key. Okay, first of all, can I just ask you to turn to agenda page 36? This just gives you an overview of our work against the strategic risks that are in the organisation. As it is a new organisation, we're only tracking our coverage since the 1st of April, so there are still a lot of gaps. And given the conversations earlier in this committee, you will probably appreciate the financial sustainability of the NTFP and budget overspend. Those two strategic risks are obviously areas that we will want to make sure we're focusing some of our internal audit resource on providing assurance where necessary. You'll be glad to know, given this has come so soon after the September update, there are no adverse audit opinions that I need to bring to your attention. But what I will just highlight are where some audits have moved along since September. So again, if you turn to Appendix B, which starts on agenda page 38 and runs through to 45, the audits highlighted on agenda page 39 in yellow, those are the ones that have moved on from draft to final report stage since the last update. You'll notice that there is a reasonable assurance there around post-16 education subcontracting arrangements. That was a piece of work we had to do on behalf of the authority for the DFE assurance. And you'll note there are some grants that were also certified there as well. And then on agenda page 40, it just highlights a number of reviews that have moved on from fieldwork in progress to draft report stage. And the ones there that I would also just draw your attention to that are rather important is the health and safety governance culture review. And hopefully that will be wrapped up and be able to report to this committee at your next date in January. So the main focus of this report is actually to look at, like I said, what we're looking for moving forward in quarters 3 and 4. So what we've got started on agenda page 42, which is our rolling audit plan, the things that are on our radar to look at moving forward. We're still going through various meetings with DMTs, executive directors and service directors to agree what the priority areas are. Indeed, we're meeting with Jason and Nicola next week to discuss what some of the priorities are from their point of view, which no doubt will result in some changes on what our priorities are over the next 5 to 6 months. As has been mentioned, obviously this is a new authority and a lot of internal controls are not stable or fully embedded yet. So there's a lot of risk in the organisation. So making sure our coverage is right is a significant challenge. So whilst I appreciate obviously the financial risks are certainly right up there as most important, there are still other risks across the organisation as well. So just have that in mind with where our work does need to fall to make sure we do give a balanced opinion at the end of the financial year. So in terms of just some key areas that we're focusing on over the next 5 or 6 months at the moment that I draw your attention to, we do have some audit time in there around cyber security. That's on agenda page 44, those are listed out. We also have some of the key financial core assurance areas that we're picking up around creditors and debtors, obviously to make sure those core assurance areas or financial areas are operating effectively, as well as looking at some stuff around MSD, given that's a new finance system and will be underpinning the financial statements of this authority that, again, this committee is responsible for giving some assurance over. Other key areas in there, culture, behaviours, ethics, some very important areas. Again, getting the exact timing right is going to be a challenge given the fact that there's a lot of change going on in this organisation. So again, it is a rolling plan and trying to make sure that we get the timing right is important. I won't go into any more details. I said it is just the input during the next few weeks or months or whenever you feel it's appropriate to give your input on what you think are the key areas that internal audit should be focusing on, given the risks that you are aware of within this organisation. Obviously, Councillor Chilcott did mention about getting necessary assurance around financial controls and governance, and internal audit is one of those tools that can also provide that assurance. So making sure our work is closely aligned to the risks of the authority is very important. As I said, it's just a brief update, so I have nothing else to add on that, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alistair. I think certainly from, I'll bring in a second, Andy, certainly from the conversation we've had this morning, it sounds like there's some work to be done around children's services, particularly around that high needs block and understanding what the financial controls look like, benchmarking perhaps where we are versus similar authorities, and if there's any learning that we can usefully take that might help to improve cost management in that particular, in fact, outcomes management rather than just costs in that particular area. I don't know if members want to add anything else, Lindy and Mandy.
Thank you. So in terms of the public sector internal auditing standards that I believe you are following, we need to communicate results that would include the conclusions as well as recommendations and action plans. So I only saw that you've got a little summary of the agreed internal audit actions and the rating priority 1 and 2 and 3. Maybe if we can get the details of the findings, it will assist the committee in making sure that all risks are covered and to give us assurance of what are the issues on the ground with regards to controls. Also, we need to report on the scope, the objective of the audit. It is in the standards. In terms of the standards, I believe you need to have policies and procedures and a framework in place. I don't know how far that process is, if I can get an update on that. And then also to monitor the agreed actions by management. We also need to have a plan to state what the finding was, the agreed action to be taken, the management comment, the agreed action, as well as the due date. And we need to monitor whether management is actively implementing the internal audit findings to make sure the risks are covered. So I don't know if that's maybe internal document that's not reported here, but I would like to see something in this committee on those. And maybe also just the priority one for the purposes of this meeting, priority one finding, there's one finding, what that was about. Thank you.
So because we gave an update in September for this committee, it's a shorter report. So we do normally bring a recommendation tracking dashboard that shows where the recommendations are. We are also rolling out online dashboard that members of this committee will have access to, that they can go in as and when they please to see the progress made with recommendations, and also oversee the internal audit plan. And inside that online access as well is where some of the scoping information will be and where the individual audit reports are reported. We do report by exception because we do try and deliver as many audits as possible. We generally report where there's an adverse audit opinion. So if it's a limited assurance or a no assurance audit opinion, then we bring the details to the committee's attention. Like I said, because it's so soon after the September update, there's a few things that we haven't included. But I'm happy to go through all this offline to appreciate your new and take you through all the processes and policies that we've got in place and how we're structured and operate and how we work.
I think that would be helpful, Lindy, if that's all right, if you want to pick up outside the meeting with Alistair. So I've got Mandy, and then I'd like to draw this item to a close if possible.
Thank you. First question's on a similar vein, actually. I was looking at the audit names, and actually they don't often give you much detail about what they're about. I would personally find it helpful if we just had a couple of lines just giving a bit more info just on what direction of travel is. I would find that helpful. My second question is, bearing in mind the previous item and the pressures on this council, there is a huge long list of planned work for the year with lots of new things coming in. My question is, are there too many on the list given the pressures on the organisation? Is there enough financial internal audit going on? There's not a huge number there that are directly finance related. And if I look, I think we're 7 months through the year and you've probably only got a fifth or a sixth actually worked through or just started. So is it a realistic list? Should we actually, given the pressures on this council, be stringent on what is deliverable and what's not?
So I think those are probably fair challenges in terms of your resources, Alistair. Do you have any particular thoughts about how we can perhaps reprioritise some of the actions, particularly versus our larger strategic risks?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the internal audit plan came to this committee in April, and there was a separate document that I sent, a placeholder document that included all the scope information around the individual audits. A number of additional reviews have come in during the year, such as investigations and other such like. We haven't taken anything out to accommodate those reviews that have come in addition. So while this is a rolling plan, prioritisation is key. I'm not removing anything from the plan because the committee did agree that this was the areas that we would focus on, so nothing has been removed. The list of works isn't something that I'm expecting to be delivered in its entirety by the 31st of March. It is the areas that we've agreed are priority areas. What we have to do is assess which ones are the highest priority and where we would focus our time. So there will be things in here that will move into the next financial year for us to complete. Like I said, because I think there's about 22 additional reviews that have come in during the year already, and we've taken nothing out. So there is a place or a process we need to go through in realigning the timings. And as I said, because it's quite a new organisation and quite an unstable organisation, there are issues with trying to get audits underway in a timely manner. And I guess there was an element of that to be expected. So timing is very important. So there will be a case to move it around. In terms of financial coverage, one of the things that we did structure in terms of our appendix here was we structured the audits against the strategic risks, but in some cases they cover more than one strategic risk, which made it a bit more messy to look at, hence why it's structured by directorate. So there are financial control audits in there, particularly around what we would call core financial areas: creditors, debtors, main accounting, budget monitoring, the core things the organisation must be getting right to be a healthy organisation. But there is definitely more to do, particularly given all the additional measures that are being put in place around the financial savings that need to be delivered. And those are the things that I'm expecting will come into our plan and will be the financial changes that will come about with our work.
Thank you. So suggestion, Chair, I think it needs to be looked at. I don't think you can keep adding things all the time without reviewing what's still there and maybe take some out. I think it's too high an expectation. And secondly, I just wonder whether in that one-off session we're going to do, whether within that we can consider whether there are any areas we would like as a committee, the internal audit, to have a look at. I think that would work quite well in that session.
So I think that's helpful. I think Alistair wants to come back. So I think what he's saying is, because this is a rolling plan, items will shift up or down, but he's not necessarily wanting to take things off the table because these are things that we want to look at some point. It's just a question of when. Is that fair, Alistair?
That is a fair assessment. Obviously, the annual opinion is bound to tie in with the annual governance statement, but in terms of an internal auditing process, it is continuous. So we're constantly trying to make sure we update and reflect what the wishes are of senior management and the internal audit committee as well. So yeah, in terms of it's a rolling plan, and you will see this, some of these audits on this rolling plan shape into something that's brought back for the April or March audit committee in terms of looking at the reviews that will be done over the next financial year. But from an internal audit point of view, it's a continuous process. We don't want to be demarked by 31st of March is a boundary, and so this has got to be done by the 31st of March, because it's, as I say, trying to get that message. It's a continuous process.
Thanks, Alistair. So I've got Andy that would like to come in with a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Mentioned by Steve earlier, and Jason obviously said that it's the second biggest threat to the organisation. It's the second iceberg we're coming across, the high needs block spend. Can we have a bit more information on that? Because I don't really understand that 100% myself, and we need some reassurance on that. Can that come as more, more detail into the next, to our next meeting? Even if it's just more of an update of what the situation is, how we're going to overcome it. Thank you.
If I may on that, we're happy to put something into the audit plan around that in terms of doing an audit assurance piece of work, but in terms of an update, that would probably be something that management would need to do.
Thank you. Can we get that from management, Jason?
Yeah, so there was a member briefing on this last couple of weeks ago. Happy to circulate those slides.
Thank you. I obviously missed it, but
yeah, we're
part
of a national programme delivering better value and send. So yeah, I can send around members the slides that went out to members. They're pretty good and do explain it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, members, are you happy to move on from this item to note the plan as it is, taking into account the concerns around prioritisation and the addition of new items? I think we perhaps need to understand a little bit more about how these are being prioritised down the line, Alistair. So if we just take that offline and look at how we present that perhaps differently in future, if that's okay. Members happy? Yep. Yeah. Perfect. All right, so we're going to move on to item 8, which is the external audit findings report. Do members want a very quick comfort break, or are you happy to press on? Okay. Do we take a 5-minute comfort break and then come back? Thank you. So moving on to item 8, which is the external audit findings report for South Somerset District Council. So Nikki, do you want to introduce this item?
Going to pass over to Barry to come in, and then I'll come in off the back with Graham if any for a status position update.
Barry.
Thanks for that excellent introduction, Nicola. So I won't quite do the same, but Beth is online as well. When you get the difficult questions, no. So this is our audit findings report for the year ending March 22 for South Somerset District Council. It's not as complete as I would like to have been. I'll be completely honest with you. We did want to make sure that we will be signing the audit opinion after the committee today. That isn't going to happen. There is still a number of areas which are outstanding. The key ones, which probably won't come as a surprise to most members, is around property valuations and the valuation of investment properties. That said, we have made some good progress on that, and I am assured that we should be getting responses within the next few days or week or so. Most of the other work is largely complete, but Beth will give us an update on that. You will see, I won't go through all of the detail of the report, but you will see that there have been a number of amendments to the accounts that have been processed, none of which have significant impact on the financial position reported within the comprehensive income and expenditure account, and the largest of those relates to the pension fund revaluation that's gone through. I would emphasise, though, that there are still a number of errors that are being identified and amendments are identified, so that does take time both for us to identify and to check that those amendments have been processed appropriately. And so we would just encourage the council to ensure that it redoubles its efforts to make sure that the accounts that are presented for audit are as accurate as they can be. I know that Graham is here supporting us, so I would just like to pass on my thanks. I think Graham has been an excellent addition and resource to help move the audit forward, and I know he's as disappointed as I am that we're not as far forward as we could be, but you can hold both of our feet to the fire that it will be resolved within the next couple of weeks or so. We're therefore asking that members give delegated authority to the Director of Finance, Jason, and to Councillor Mike as the Chair of Audit Committee to sign the accounts and approve those on your behalf once the audit has been concluded. We will then provide a final version of the audit findings report that can come for information to this committee, but not necessarily for any further discussion, because hopefully we can cover off all the questions today. If I may, Chair, just briefly hand over to Beth, who's been sat there sitting patiently, just to give us an update on the current position and outstanding matters.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Chair. I will provide an update on the outstanding items, as Barry mentioned, but I also wanted to flag that in Appendix A, there is one of our action plan control recommendations where there is a management response noted as to be confirmed. I can confirm that we have received a response from management, and the response for members' information is that management accepts the recommendation and will look to implement the action recommended as part of procedures for 23-24 financial accounts closure. So wanted to provide that update. In terms of concluding on the audit, we have, as Barry mentioned, a number of queries still outstanding in relation to property areas within the financial statements. So property, plant and equipment, investment property, and some group property, plant and equipment. Whilst they're not significant in number, they do take a little bit of time to resolve, and we are working with the council in order to conclude on those. We are also still working through group related disclosure areas. This primarily relates to the fact that we have to finalise that work right at the end of all of our audit procedures, because any amendments to the council's financial statements then have to flow through to the overall group financial statements, meaning that we need to do final sets of checks on the balancing of those statements and ensuring that the adjustments have been appropriately processed, and that the components which are consolidated into those group accounts have also taken account of any adjustments that came about as part of those audits. So we are still working through group related items. We had to select an extended sample in relation to expenditure testing as we identified some errors, and as a result of that, that was identified relatively late on in our audit process, and so that work is still ongoing. We have received the majority of sample items back from the council, but are still working our way through those. And then after that, there are a small number of disclosure areas which, again, it makes sense to do the audit work once right at the end of the process. They're very small bespoke tasks that are discrete enough to be able to be completed in a short space of time. So we tend to leave those towards the end. We have, I will assure the committee, undertaken a high level review of those in advance so that we are comfortable we shouldn't identify significant issues with those areas as we come to do the detailed work. So we haven't ignored them entirely, but they will be completed as part of our finalisation. And then there will be a small number of concluding procedures which we undertake right up to the point of signing the audit opinion. So whilst the list is small, a number of the areas are complex, and that's one of the reasons that it has taken a little bit longer than we had all hoped to be able to conclude on this audit work. I will hand back over to Barry, and I'm happy to take any questions if needed remotely.
Thanks, Beth. Chair, any questions?
Right. So, Nikki, I think you wanted to come in, but I suppose from my point of view, obviously it's disappointing that we're not quite in a place where the committee can get final sign off on these. I understand the reasons why, but it's slightly frustrating, I think, for all of us. And I don't think there's anyone around this table that isn't frustrated by that. But there we go. Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. So Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance and Procurement. So probably just for a new member of our audit committee is just to say, when we inherited our finance teams for the from the 5 councils into one, I would say that South Somerset was probably in the worst position in terms of the staff we inherited. We only inherited 2 permanent members of staff. One of those was on maternity leave. So that left 1 permanent member of staff who was also trying to complete LGR work, as well as kind of other priorities we were chucking at to form as a new council. So it's not a defence mechanism, but it is just to say that picture is what we inherited. That's not the position we're in today as we enter into new Somerset Council, because we've obviously formed a corporate team there that will be in a different position to produce sets of accounts. But I think we should recognise that, and also recognise that actually some of this position we're in with South Somerset is not just solely down to the finance team. We spoke about the valuations being one area. We also, as a council, lost expertise in that area, which has slowed down the responses to the audit queries that have come in. So we kind of lost 2 senior persons in that area. So again, we're down to 1 person to deal with the queries, as well as trying to do the other stuff that they had, as well as kind of other pressures across the council that we had in payroll for supply of information. So it's not a series of excuses, but I think it's just worth recognising that we're perhaps in a position that we didn't want to be, just due to the situation we were in and the numbers of staff we were left in that area. And that's why we brought Graham Oliver in, who's sat very quietly down the end, to oversee the audit. And we brought in an additional staff, but they were temporary staff that were brought in. And although they had experience of closing accounts before, they didn't have the history of what has happened to be able to research finance systems and kind of get us into a position where those mistakes in the accounts weren't made. But obviously the important thing is we recognise those mistakes were made, and we ensure they're not carried through into the new council's accounts. So I'll just hand back.
Thanks for the context, Nikki. I think that's helpful. So over to the committee for questions, comments, thoughts. Mandy?
Thank you very much. And thanks for the explanation. I think, again, linking back to that very first large session we had, the immaturity of the organisation, again, I think that keeps running through a lot of the papers we're discussing today. So a few questions. There's reference in the accounts to asset values at cost or realisable value. Can someone just talk about cost and realisable value and what we should and shouldn't be doing? Because it's potentially a big figure in the accounts, and there just seem to be some query with it in these.
Barry, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick it up, or one of the accountants can correct me. So it's, I think the reference is in relation to the inventory. So if one thinks about the inventories in particular at South Somerset, that relates to housing stock. So the council has entered into an agreement to build some houses. Now, as we know, when you build something, sometimes it can cost a little bit more than you expected. And what you should do when you're valuing inventory is make sure that you only recognise it either at cost or how much you're eventually going to get at the end of it. So if it's cost you £250,000 to build a house, but you're only going to be able to sell it for £200,000, then you should recognise it at that lower figure. Or if you expect to get a higher figure of the 300,000, then you would only recognise it at the cost. So that's what the difference is.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Thank you. I hadn't come across it before, so thank you for that. So on page, I think it's 100, we're talking about interest rates and mitigations. And the 151 officer decided not to look at any fixed term borrowing. Now, I'm just trying to get a grapple with, is that sort of normal across councils? Is that what you'd expect to see? Or is that something that's sort of slightly unusual? Because again, that feeds into our financial position moving forward.
Sorry, Barry, is that yourself?
Just for clarity, that was the 151 officer of Somerset.
So that was the interim 151 officer at the time.
Rather than me, just to be absolute clarity on that one. In terms of the advice and guidance for longer term investments, you expect to do longer term borrowing. It's kind of the basics behind some of the treasury management and some of the professional standards.
Thank you. It's just really interesting because you have got all the councils coming together, so it's working out which best practice follows through, isn't it? My next question is, when I looked at the reserves in the accounts, there was a negative reserve there. Again, I know we've had long debates about negative reserves at Somerset. I just wondered, moving forward, how that negative reserve would be treated, please, because I didn't think you should have them.
Chair, and apologies, I'm just
Is it page 125?
yes, I'm just scrolling through so I can just thank you. Yes, it should be, and I'm fairly confident this is the case for South Somerset. The only negative reserves appear on what are referred to as unusable reserves. The primary one is the pensions reserve, because, as you quite rightly say, normally reserves should be positive, and they can't go negative. The pension reserve is different because it's there to reflect the negative liability in the long term on the pension valuations that occur. That is offset by the legislation around local government pensions that result in the 3-year triennial valuation that then sets the contribution rate by all authorities to offset that over the long term. So that is an exception of a reserve, and to sort of emphasise that's an unusable reserve, so not one that's at Jason's facilities. And apologies, I didn't introduce myself, Chair. I'm Graham Oliver, who's, as Nicola said earlier, has been brought in to support her and the team on closing the accounts and seeing the audit through.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. So it's fair to say it's not going to affect our day-to-day, it just sits there effectively, which all the councils will come together. Thank you very much. It's just quite unusual to see. So my next question was, the audit's not finished yet. So should we actually be agreeing the accounts? And one of the areas is PPE, and we know there can be some big swings in PPE. There can be big amounts involved. It might even be material. So my question is, as a committee, should we be just agreeing it without being finalised? I'm not totally comfortable doing that. And also we've got the letter of representation. Again, should we, the recommendation is to agree and support that. Again, should we be doing that if we're not all sort of finalised?
Okay, Barry, do you want to pick that up as auditor?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor. It's a really good challenge. And again, what we often find is that we come to these audit committees, not just here, but within local government, and there's a little bit of work that's still outstanding just to get that audit over the line. We therefore do say that it's okay to do it under delegated authority as long as there are no material changes to the accounts. Should there be any material changes, then we would say that it has to come back to the audit committee for reapproval.
I'm not sure that it says that in the recommendation, Chair, just to be clear.
So we can amend the recommendation to reflect the fact that if there are any material changes, it has to come back to committee Members are comfortable?
Thank you.
Okay. With respect to the letter of rep, what's your concern about signing that now, Mandy?
Again, that's not normally signed till everything's sort of finished. That was my understanding. Everything has to be done and signed off.
Okay,
So
we
do
can
we
sign
need to
that with
delegate
proviso
that subject to again?
Yeah. Okay, so the amended recommendation would then read that the.
Yes.
Sorry, somebody's speaking online. Please, can you mute your mic? Thank you. So the amended recommendation is that the chair, vice chair, in conjunction with the 151, would have delegated authority to sign off both the external audit and the statement of accounts, subject the letter of rep, subject to there being no material change to any of the accounts.
Being really pedantic, Chair, they're two separate recommendations, so you just probably need to.
Yeah,
you can't lump them.
I was lumping them together for ease of communication. That's all. But
I'm being pedantic.
No,
recommendations
Mandy, that's absolutely
recommendations.
fine. You're welcome to do so. So
thank you.
What I'm saying is that essentially mirror changes to recommendations that. So just to be clear for members, that both the letter of representation and separately the accounts would be subject to the same proviso. Yeah. So are members happy to agree the audit based on those? So proposed, Simon, all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? No. Okay. Thank you. That's
Chair, did you take that decision as the amendment?
yeah. So that's the voting through on the amendment then. So now, okay. So Mandy to propose. Okay. So we're voting on the. I'm confused now. So we just voted on the amendment. Yes. So now we need to vote on the substantive. So Mandy to propose the substantive. Any seconder? Simon? All those in favour? Raise your hands. Okay, any against? Any abstentions? Fine. So we've got an approved recommendation that's been amended. Okay, so can I move on to item 9, which is the external audit findings report for Somerset West and Taunton. There is, I've got a note of change on page 195. The covering report says 21-22 and it should say 22-23. And further down the page at 1.1, it says audit committee is to approve the statement of accounts for South Somerset when it should in fact say Somerset West and Taunton. Okay, so that's who's introducing this item?
I don't really have a lot to say on the item. We have Gail online who would like to can pick up any specific items in relation to this paper.
Hello, Gail. Did you want to introduce the audit? Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just hope my voice holds out for this session. So our report shows that the audit is substantially complete and our anticipated audit opinion will be unqualified, but will include an emphasis of matter paragraph. This paragraph is simply to refer to the reader of the opinion to your financial statements to highlight the matter you have raised in regard to the local government reorganisation. As a result of the reorganisation, this will be the last set of financial statements for Somerset West and Taunton. Our report highlights that the value for money work is not yet complete and therefore the auditor's annual report will be issued later in the year. And a letter explaining this delay was sent to the chair of this committee and is included in this report for reference. Our report gives some national context, but also explains the challenges and delays we have had on this audit. In addition to this, there have been a number of material adjustments and prior period adjustments contained within the report. Page 7 of our report contains a list of outstanding work as at the time that we drafted the report. From this list, debtors can now be removed, but the rest of the work remains outstanding. I will like the committee to note that we have received some further information this morning, so we will work with management to close down these outstanding points as quickly as we can. The report shows two significant risks in particular, being the valuation of investment property and the valuation of land and buildings, whereby we've had to make some material changes to the accounts. For the investment property, our work in this area is complete. However, a material error was found whereby the estates team and the finance team had not communicated effectively, and revisions to valuations had not been updated in the fixed asset register, resulting in the incorrect value being used in the financial statements. For land and buildings, our work again is complete in this area, and the report gives details around our testing. We found a material error here, whereby the valuer had only valued the property based on 1 out of 3 floors and had taken an incorrect cost per square foot. This error also affected the prior year, which resulted in a prior period adjustment. Another prior period adjustment had been noticed by management, whereby the Brewhouse Theatre had previously been missed from the valuations. The report also contains details over our completeness and cut-off testing. And as a team, we are completing the work for this for all the legacy councils that are audited by Grant Thornton. We have raised 4 recommendations to date. However, our work in this area is not yet complete as we await sample and query evidence from management. As you can see from my update, the work is not yet complete, and we ask the committee to give the delegated authority for signing the financial statements. We will again issue a final report once the work is complete for information for the committee. I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, so we seem to have accidentally forgotten the theatre. That's a first. Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. Before we start, can I propose an amendment again to 1.1 and 1.4, just to say, provided there are no material adjustments, if that's okay, if I could.
Yeah, so propose Mandy. Can I have a seconder? Mike, all those in favour of that amendment? Any against?
Thank you.
We'll come on to the substantive later when we've had the discussion.
Lovely, thank you. So just a couple of questions. Page 197 of the report, which gives the background, lists the councils that had outstanding audits and which years they were, but Somerset, West and Taunton isn't in that list. So presumably it should have been. That's on page 197, right at the bottom of. So my first question on the accounts is page 205. Why was the MRP lower? Because I'd expect it to go up, given all the activity in the year. Just try and find it. I think it's 205. Let me find it.
Chair, if I may, and happy to be contradicted by Nikki or Jason. So firstly, on principle, it's not surprising for MRP year on year to go up or down. The MRP is based on the closing balance of the capital finance requirement each year. When the budget is set, that's based on the capital budget and the estimated amount of borrowing that's planned. As can often be the case, is that borrowing may not materialise due to either the council using other capital resources or slippage in the capital programme, meaning it's not required. So that's a point of the principle of it. The specific on why it went down for Somerset, West and Taunton, if I may, I would need to take that away because I don't have that detail, but I wanted just to set the context of how MRP works.
Thanks, Graham. That's helpful. I think if we have a written response on that circulated to the whole committee, that would be helpful.
Thank you. My second was around a big figure, and I was trying to grapple with it and didn't. And I'm not an expert in the accounts, as you all are. 67 million move in reserves. It's on page 215, and they went from 313 million to 381. I couldn't get a sense in the accounts why there was a big move there, and I've read the notes to the accounts, etc., but I still couldn't get to the bottom of it. So hopefully, because it's a huge figure, hopefully somebody can help me out on that.
Sorry, councillor, could you repeat that
Page-
page number again?
Yeah, sure. Page 215, which is the movement in reserve statement.
Thank you.
So at the end of 1st of April 22, at the top of the page, it was 313, and then it ends up at 381. It's a huge figure, 67,235,000. I just couldn't grapple working through the accounts what that was and what that big movement had been caused by. Again, happy for a written response, but it was a huge figure within the accounts.
So, Councillor and Chair, the majority of that movement is down to changes in the valuation of the pensions reserve, which and across the, I believe across the country, but certainly across all Somerset authorities, because it's one, I think, positive impact coming of the economic situation the country's in, and with increased interest rates and so on, it's resulted in an improvement to the liability on the pension reserve in the latest valuation, and that's what's come through into the pension reserve. So the majority of our unusable reserves, that 67 million, relates to that pension reserve adjustment.
Thank you very much. I went looking for a note to that effect, but couldn't find it anywhere. So I did look, I just couldn't find it. So thank you for that. That's helpful. Yeah, and just the last thing was around the Brewhouse Theatre. And again, it's a big figure in the account. So that's on page 294. The figure in the paper here for prior year adjustments is 17,449,000. Again, huge figure. And I've heard from the introduction that's to do with, was it not doing the whole building and not having it in? Is that what the brew house is valued at and wasn't included at all? I was just interested because again, it's such a big figure in the accounts. Page 294.
Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the reason it wasn't included before, so the brew house was in the asset register before. The brew house is leased to a third party organisation, and the view of the accounting treatment of that previously was that it would be included at nil value in the accounts. On the review, as happens every year of it, and I looked at this. On leased assets, it technically comes down to the basis of where the risk and reward sits with the asset as to whose books it sits in. And on review, because of the responsibility of the council around maintenance of the building, my view was that it was wrongly included at zero value and therefore should be revalued and included at its proper value as per a professional value estimation. So that's why it was included in for this year, and obviously as it's a significant value and affect the previous years, that's why it was done as a prior period adjustment as well, because it significantly changed the value in the previous years. So and apologies, I'm not sure whether that answered your question or not, councillor.
Yeah, it did partly. My question was really, it's gone back 1 year. Presumably it could have affected even previous years if they'd treated it in the same way. So my question was, why have you gone back 1 year if you haven't gone back previous?
No, absolutely, and yes, it would have, but you only ever go back to adjust the prior year that is shown as comparator within the accounts that you're approving, because the other sets of accounts have been signed off and are not now subject to change.
Thank you. That's my learn for the day, Chair.
Thank you. Andy.
Got a couple of quick questions, if I may. Not too sure of the page number, because on mine it says page 9. I'm not too sure. I don't know where it. Yeah, so it's on Somerset Western Taunton's page 9. So I have to go back a fair way to get that up. Yes, it's the account. Getting there.
Is it the balance sheet page? Page
It
12.
is 208 on everyone else's, so it's page 9 on mine. Okay, so a couple of quick questions. On the balance sheet extract, it shows long-term liabilities. Now, I'm assuming that is long-term loans, is that correct?
Yes, it will be predominantly, though it could be lease agreements as well. I'm just scrolling through to the detailed balance sheet and then I can confirm, Councillor.
So my question will be, from the difference between 22 to 23 is 115 million. So how could we have paid off 115 million in 1 year if it is the loans? Because that's a big figure in my estimation. Thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you to Grace from Grant Thornton. I've just heard you whispering. That is actually the pension liability. So the pensions appears in two places. It appears as a liability, which is a long-term liability, as well as then the negative pension reserve to equalise that. So that is the corresponding reduction in the liability due to the revaluation.
Excellent, thank you. My next question is on the same page. At the bottom, it says the HRA has reported an overspend of £227,000 for the year. Okay, that's on page 9. If you then go to page, I'm going to go through mics a minute. If you go then to page 214, shows you the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. It shows that there's a 1.3 million underspend. So which is the right figure?
So both are correct, but they are the peculiarities of local government statement of accounts, which I will attempt to explain, means that they're reported on two different bases. So as far as you're concerned and the reserves of the HRA, it is the summary table on the first page you quoted, because that is based on the budget that has been set by the council at the time and how it's been spent against. The comprehensive income and expenditure statement is how I describe it as a proper accounting statement, i.e. it includes things in there that within local government get reversed out. So the biggest one is depreciation charge that has to be charged into it. So that's the figure that's in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. One of the peculiarities of the MERS, the movement in reserve statements, is those accounting charges that don't impact the budget.
Cash wise.
The cash flow get reversed out. If that's
I understand
clear.
that. Yes. And my final and last question is on the reserves. But I'll find it a second. On the reserves, we're showing a lot of figures that are coming out, they're being transferred out. Okay. What's here? Showing. Right, got there. So that is 46. So we've got to try and find the numbers that everybody else has got. So page 244, okay, it's showing on the earmark reserves, we're showing a lot of transfers out. For example, like the COVID business rates holiday grant, we had £5.8 million at the end of 2022. Then it's transferred 5.8 million. So that money goes back to government, or is it gone into another account? And for example, we've got the commercial investment funding 2 million, and that's been taken out. Like new homes bonus has been taken out. The various things have been taken out. So where have they gone to? Thank you.
So the transfers out is where there's a slim possibility that involves grants that have been repaid, but I don't believe it is in this case at all. The transfers out is when those reserves have been used to support the revenue spend that's happened. So in the case of the COVID grant, the council received the majority of those in 21-22. They get put in the reserve in order to offset spend that would have occurred in 22-23. Similarly, the transfers in reflecting where the council has got budgets which they've moved into earmark reserves to preserve them for future years. That's.
So my question is, are we transferring out of some of the stuff to, we know we've got to look at our earmark reserves in the sense that if we don't no longer require them, is then to release them and put them into a pot. So are these being transferred into this so-called pot where we, if I say for it, I don't mean it's free money, but it's not being earmarked for a particular purpose?
So no, all of these transfers out are for going into the revenue account for the specific purposes that they are set aside for. Every year, Jason, as the 151, has the reviews reserves, and it's within his power to then agreement reallocate those if they. But these transfers out are not for that purpose. These are because they've been used for the purposes they were set aside.
Thank you for answering all my questions. Very, very good. Thank you.
Perfect. Right. So I'm conscious of time. Lindy.
Thank you, Chair. I am a bit worried about the material adjustments that's been coming up, and I do take note of all the challenges that you have. So please don't take it personally, but as a audit committee member, we need to get assurance that all errors are accounted for and correctly recorded in the financial statements. I understand that the external auditors will extrapolate, and it was an unqualified report, so it's not too dangerous yet. However, I would like to get assurance on what work was done to ensure that the whole population, where the errors were found, like the one valuation that wasn't included, what work was done by finance to ensure that all properties and all valuations were included subsequent to the finding of the external auditors. And then just a quick one, maybe for external audit on your evaluation going forward for going concern on the Unitary Board of Somerset, what's your views on those? Or if you can just, I know it's a bit early to make a statement, but maybe if you can just keep management abreast of what your views on going concern would be, because I did see some in the reports, it's still fine for now. However, going forward, it might be an issue. Thank you.
Okay, Nikki and then Barry.
Hi, yeah, so just to give assurance, I think what I would say is these are legacy council accounts where we have had a huge turnover of staff as well. So going forward, I think we will have a much stronger team, I hope, if we manage to retain our team, because obviously with everything that's going on and financial challenges we're facing, we are at risk of losing some of our team. But I hope at the moment that I managed to retain quite a good, strong corporate team who will be focused on this and will pick up some of that work in terms of making sure we're working with our property teams. You've got to remember everything is on going to be on a new finance system. We've linked that finance system back to the new property database that has been put together as well, tech forward. So I think going forward it will be completely different in terms of the way we pull the information together and work across the teams. But it's hard to comment on me personally about legacy, what happened in legacy councils, but I don't know, Graham, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thanks, Nikki. So it's just really on the technicality of the how assets are picked for revaluation. So in the case of the investment properties, which is one area where material changes has happened, those the full portfolio is revalued every year for investment properties for the nature of them. The other property and plant and equipment, so the properties are revalued on a rolling 5-year programme that is so not exactly but approximately 20% of the year, but also there is a requirement as far as the value for everything to be looked at from the point of view, do we still think that the value contained is a true and fair value? So for example, if there had been a crash in the market that materially affected property prices, have we taken that into account on the 80% that were not subject to formal valuation this year. So that's how over that 5-year programme all assets are valued, and that's as per the code of practice as set by SITFA that we need to follow, if that helps.
Comfortable with that, Lindy? Yeah. Okay. Barry, did you want to come back?
Thank you. So there's a specific page which addresses going concern in the audit findings report. So you're absolutely right. It does seem a bit strange that you could have an organisation that's potentially bust, but we don't have a concern around its going concern. And the reason for that is under the statement of recommended practice, practice note 10, it's assumed that all public sector bodies will continue because of the continuation of services. So even though the individual body itself may no longer exist, the services will continue to be provided. So if we think about Somerset, or if the other councils which have issued section 114 notices, then what often happens is commissioners come in and they effectively take over the running of the organisation. So although the normal democratic processes are put to one side, those services will continue to operate. And in the event that the organisation is deemed to completely failed and it won't be able to recover, then those services will be transferred to another organisation. So in that respect, those services will always continue. And that's the overriding principle. But again, a little bit more detail set out in practice note 10.
Okay, so I'm really conscious of time now, so I'm not going to allow any more interventions on this one. We need to move to the recommendation. So we've got an amended recommendation. So there are still some minor amends still to come on these accounts. So with members' permission, given the proviso that we voted on earlier on, I'm seeking delegated authority to sign the accounts, provided that there are no material changes to those accounts. So can I have a proposer, Andy, and a seconder, Tim? All members in favour? Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Regarding the letter of representation, I need a proposer. Norman, yeah. And a seconder, Andy. All those in favour? Again, the proviso that these won't be signed unless there are no material changes to the accounts. Okay. So we are noting the audit findings report from Grant Thornton and the additional fees. Everyone comfortable? Happy? Right. Perfect. So I'm going to move on to item 10, which is the external audit update for Sedgemoor. Please, can this be very, very brief?
It should be signed on Tuesday, the 31st of October. Thank you, Chair.
That's wonderfully brief. Thank you. Extra points for Barry. Right. Moving on to the strategic risk management update report. Angela, I know that there isn't an awful lot to add because the strategic risks haven't moved from the previous meeting, which was only held a few weeks ago. So, Lindy, we had a full conversation at the last meeting because there haven't been there's only been what 3 and a bit weeks since the last meeting. We haven't had any material changes to those risks. So this isn't the normal report that we would receive, just to assure you. Okay. Perhaps if you would like to have a conversation about risk, you'd like to pick up with Angela separately outside the meeting, just to give yourself some understanding of the process that we would normally follow. That said, if any member does have any burning question they'd like to ask, you may ask it. Mandy.
Thank you. They've sat for the whole meeting. It'd be rude not to ask a question, Chair, wouldn't it? A couple of things. First of all, thank you to referring to the financial position as an emergency. I think that's about the first time I've seen it. So in terms of risk, I think that's helpful. And I'm pleased to see ORG 67 around coastal protection, which I think is a new area for us. So a couple of questions very quickly. On ORG 63, which is on page 356, it talks about the risks around, sorry, let's go back to 356. The risk around commercial investments, and the cause is rising interest rates, increased borrowing and debt. I think also as a cause there, you need to add that a lot of it's because that blend of a lot of short-term borrowing, and I think that's causing a lot of challenge as well. So it'd be good to have that reflected in the cause. And I move swiftly on. Page 359. ORG 62, and at the end of it, it says resulting in a fragmented management system with increased, and it's left me hanging. I don't know with increased what. So it's on ORG 62 on page 359 in the first column, details with increased something or other. Just for next time, it's left me hanging. I shall wait with bated
Blankety
breath.
blank, everyone.
And the last one is ORG 65, and I'm sure this is just a typo. When you look at the risk, it's 20 and then 0. That's page 361. Just flick back to it. When you look at the multipliers, you've got current risk assessment 20, controlled risk assessment 0. And I think that there just needs to be a figure in there. So just typo-y things, but helpful for next time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela. Perfect. So by my reckoning, that takes us. Oh, sorry. Lindy and then Liz. No, sorry, just Lindy.
Yes.
Lindy.
Okay, thank you. I will then communicate with Angela. I've gone through the risks framework, and I've got a couple of questions on the risk framework. And then with regards to the report, on page 351, sorry, 350, the low risk, very low risk, which is not in the strategy, is 10. However, if you go down 2 risks on 352, yellow is a 9. So I think the 10 should be medium. It should not be, because if 9 is medium, yeah, you get it. All right, then also on page 350, there are the last control, the IT one, it's 477 days overdue. I would expect a bit of more comment on that and why it's so long overdue. Also, just semantics, the controls are being cut off, so it's very difficult to follow what the control actually is and whether it, in my opinion, would actually address the risk. And if I can make an example, I see it a couple of times, either there's no update or like on page 350, all the controls are stated under the status as in progress. However, your current inherent risk of 20 goes down to what I assumed is the residual risk to 10, but the controls are all in progress. So I can't see how the control could effectively mitigate risk and bring the risk down. And then the last one, on risk 57, which is on page 352. So this is the closest one that I could find that talks to section 114. I would wanted to see a risk report with taking all the attention. You must first see this big risk of section 114. So there are no control review updates on the controls. The controls are very shorthand, difficult to follow how this control would address the risk. And then the controls are, the residual risk is 9. For this municipality, I think everybody would agree, the controls are not currently working to address the financial crisis that we are in. So I don't know how the controls could bring down the inherent risk from 20 to 9. I'm not sure that's sufficient. And then another comment on the risks is usually we would, the order of the risk would be from high to low to get the committee's attention on the high risks first. Again, don't take it as a personal, it's just a view from somebody that's new. It should be in a matter that you can understand how the risks are addressing.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think this is when we presented to the 28th of September meeting, I think we produced a much more definitive set of slides. This is a print off from what we call JCAD, which is our risk management system. I don't believe 57 is actually right. 57 is 25. It shouldn't be 20. I don't know when this was printed and raised, but the controlled risk assessment tends to be the figure we'd like it to be in the end, not necessarily where we are now. So the current risk score tends to be where we think we are, and it is certainly 25, because I remember looking at it not long ago, and we're going to be doing some work with Jason to try and identify and improve our mitigation. So certainly that's not correct, but the controlled risk assessment tends to be, we have 3 scores. You have an uncontrolled score, so what it is before any mitigation, our current score with our mitigation, and our desired score, if you want, for want of a better word, what we would like to get to. Now, in a lot of cases, our mitigation won't necessarily always get us there, but it is a score that we can see into the future. That's how we'd like to progress. Certainly this one, 57, is not right, because it is a 25 score. It is our highest risk, that and the budget overspend are our highest score. So I don't quite know what's happened with the reporting here, because this has come directly from JCAD. So we will correct that. Overall, in respect of controls, at the end of the day, Pam and I manage and facilitate. It's the owner of the risk or the owners of the controls that need to take action and to take responsibility for ensuring the control is being delivered. It's a piece of work that is ongoing. It's a frustration of being a risk manager, as I'm sure there are for other professions as well. We are looking at how we review risks now that obviously we're one council, to see what learning we can take from some of the districts and things like that. So we will hopefully come back with a better response. But when we report again, which will be January, Chair, I believe it is, we will have a more succinct set of slides. The register is really just as a sort of like as a backup, but we'll have a distinct set of slides that then give you a much better picture. But certainly 57 is not correct.
Jason.
Yeah, I'm actually in the system now checking it. It's not correct. This is an out-of-date printout for some time ago. It doesn't reflect where those risks have been for some time. I think your other point around the scoring in the 9s and 10s, I'm looking at how it's worked out. Yeah, I think there's an error there in terms of you can score a 10 and it be a green and 9 as a yellow. So that needs to be picked up as well. We'll take that away and look at the format of these.
Lindy.
Sorry, I just have to, I'm going to answer my own question. It's because your strategy is incorrect. The 5 times 2 was on a, yeah, okay, so you were aware of that. Yes, so that needs to be fixed in the strategy.
Thank you. Any other comments on the strategic risk register? I think there's some useful learning in there. Lindy, you've already added lots of value today in terms of your insight and input, so thank you. Andy?
Jason, who's leading on this at a senior level? Is it yourself with risk? Because we've been grappling with reports and what's on here for some time. It's not a new challenge, but I just think for the whole organisation, given where we are, that perhaps organisationally could be a bit more focus on risk, because I think there'll be more to play out on this. And if we haven't got a risk register that's accurately reflecting those risks, I think there could be a criticism about that. So I think it's an important part of the reporting, and for our officers, they need the support to get it to be as accurate and up to date as it can be. And I think we need to be looking closer.
Bring Angela in first before
I think the report is wrong, and my apologies to committee for that. That's not a professional document in any shape or form. So again, my apologies. In our defence, I would say we have just taken on a new system, a new JCAD upgrade, and that's clearly not working very well at the moment. So we will correct it for the next time. But I think one of the things I would like to achieve is actually making sure that when we present to you, you have a succinct. The register becomes an appendix for use, but you have a succinct set of slides that actually portray the risk position of this council for you to digest instead of trying to wade you through a register. That's my ideal, because I think otherwise, as a committee, you know, it's like anything. If you think about, we've got what 360 pages today. So that's my aim, is to have a succinct set of slides that will actually make sense, that will give you assurance that we are managing risk correctly as an organisation.
Right. So just to answer your question, senior responsible officer is Jason in this context. So I think we have to look at how that works through the senior leadership team. And I think we need to consider how risk is managed in a wider context beyond just the risk register. So can we take that away for a more in-depth discussion? Sorry, Liz.
Have we mentioned the new version of JCAD? And yeah, and also I've seen on first draft of executive papers the risk rating and the new risk for the budget this year as well as for the MTFP, and they're both 5 by 5, the reddest of 25s. So I think those papers that are going to executive are in a much better place than we're looking at here. But I'm hopeful with Angela as well as Pam personally working on this. But I think maybe when the new software is ready for us to see, it would be really helpful for us, this committee, or indeed on a personal level, to have a run through of how that software works and what it will produce for this committee particularly.
I've got Sarah just asking me a question, and then I'll bring.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, Pam and Angela have been working very hard on this. It's something that we didn't feel there was enough emphasis on in this council. We want to bring it to the beginning of these meetings rather than the end, so that people can really see what's happening. It is in a bit of a developmental stage at the moment, and as is the new software. But please be assured that it is a very important priority, and we are concentrating on it. And I apologise that if the risk register today isn't quite up to date, but it shows you what's happening. It's a work in progress. It is very important, and it will come back to the committee in a better state.
So I think I've certainly got an ambition to try and bump this up the agenda so that it's at the start of the committee. That hasn't worked because we've had more pressing priorities in terms of signing off the external audits and the statements of accounts. But hopefully we're largely through that legacy backlog now, and we will start to reprioritise the agendas moving forward. Mandy.
Very, very, very quick. If we're going to have some training or updates on JCAD, can we just ensure that Lindy's also invited to that, because it's easy to miss because you're a non-councillor, so that could be noted. Thank you.
Yes, please. Okay. Right. Is there any further business on the risk register? If not, I'm going to move on. Which only leaves me with the forward plan, I believe. So it is what it is at the moment. Obviously, we're going to look at slotting in this additional meeting in December. I'm very concerned about the weight of the agenda for January, which is looking extremely heavy. I'm told that we may end up with some slippage potentially on some of the audits, which might get pushed back. But it is a concern for me that we're going to end up sleeping here. Barry.
Reluctant to say this now that you've said that, Chair, but we were planning to bring the annual audit report for the reviews across all of the councils to the January committee.
Yeah. Look, so this is going to be an extremely heavy agenda, and I think we might have to look at how we manage that. So we may end up with a lunch break in the middle to allow people to come back, but the agenda pack for that meeting is going to be monstrous, and that's going to present us all with a lot of reading. So can we consider if there is anything we can do to manage that workload, whether that's pushing any non-urgent business out? Barry.
Sorry, Chair, you mentioned slippage. I think, being realistic, it's highly unlikely that the South Somerset 22-23 report will be coming. Bearing in mind, we've barely started the work yet.
That's helpful. For once in my life, that's helpful. So look, we need to look at how we can manage this, but I need all members that there is going to be a heavy workload on that session to plan accordingly. Okay. I'm going to close the meeting unless there's any other urgent business that anyone would like to raise. If not, thank you for your forbearance today. That's the word of the day. Thank you for your cooperation, and I will look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you.